Okay, welcome. Thank you. I'm Tom Suter. I'm the CEO and founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. I'd like to thank everybody for coming to our security summit here. And we'd like to little appreciation for our partners. We've got Now Secure, Aqua, Varonis, Palo Alto, Anchor, Sonatype, Zscaler, Ping Identity, and Venafi. And, we got some good swag these days. If you're a hunter, if you're outside, you were in the military, I don't know. You got an extra cap here. I'll get that. So check out this swag. Oh, sorry about that, Bob. That's the way, nail your keynote, right? Start things off. Really excited to be here. I think we actually have a little traffic issue. Some of the speakers are having a little trouble getting in. So it's like we haven't talked about traffic for about 3 years. So it's starting to come back. And also, I don't know if we planned this, but happy election day. Make sure everybody gets out to the polls. Very, very important. I couldn't make it this morning because I had to be here too early, but I'm scheduling my time later. So I don't have my sticker yet, but I'm planning to vote like everybody else. And it's a good time to talk about security when you're talking about election systems and different kinds of systems coming up here. And actually, I don't know if we planned it. I don't know if we're that good, Bob, but we have Bob Costello, Chief Information Officer, Office of the Chief Information Officer, Office of the Director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Welcome for our keynote. Thank you, Bob.
All right, good morning. I'm really short, so we're going to lower that down a little bit. Normally, they have a little thing for me to stand on. I wish I was kidding. All right, good morning, everyone. So I'm Bob Costello. I'm the CIO for CISA. I've been there for about a year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CISA mission and how I know we're discussing like what's changed since the executive order. Sometimes I'll talk a little bit too about like what hasn't changed, like the amount of vendors that contact me for meetings. That's probably gone up just a little bit, not looking at anyone here. A lot of people are also maybe unfamiliar with the entirety of CISA's mission. So kind of like, what does CISA do? And, we just mentioned elections. So we have a big role in election security. We have a huge role in infrastructure, critical infrastructure, power plants, dams, nuclear power plants in particular. And a lot of people just think that it's just our cyber mission. So a lot of times my role is kind of straddling technologies across all of these areas to provide services. So it's very different than just a pure cyber mission. So, our role is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk. And that's a lot of what we do in cybersecurity, or even what the executive orders are talking about, buying down risk. And that's really hard. Because I think everyone thinks, oh, it must be like so awesome that you're like the CIO of CISA. And it is. I have like some of the best bosses in government, and Jenna Easterly is incredibly supportive. But like most government CIOs, most of my budget goes to O&M. So I'm really looking to partner with ATARC and others on how we can use our dollars effectively and then modernize, get better, expand, capacity build, ensure that our teams have the resources needed to deliver on our mission. Because my role is not different than many other government CIOs. My role is very inward facing at CISA. We have the cybersecurity director, infrastructure security director, and emergency comms director that do that outward facing mission. Yeah, CSD handles all that work with the federal civilian executive branch agencies and others. My role is to make sure they have the tools, resources, and equipment for our field operations to do their jobs. But at the same time, I have to make sure that CISA is held to the same standards that we enact on the rest of the government, often with a smaller budget than perhaps I was used to for those of you who worked with me at CBP, where we had like a printing press in the basement for many years. I think it's a little bit different now. Sorry, guys. But I think that if you were to ask what my goal is at CISA or what we're trying to do internally, it's really maturing it as the agency matures. We hit about 4 years old in December, and that's very new for a government agency. So a lot of my challenges are things that many of you may have faced in a merger and acquisition. You're trying to combine cultures. You're trying to combine IT systems. You're trying to have people work together that maybe didn't work together before. And then also we're building a different relationship with DHS headquarters than we have before. Not being a headquarters organization, I'm busy building my own systems to support CISA as an operating component of DHS. So when I talk to industry or partners, one of my big goals is how do I not build the traditional government IT office? So when I'm standing up a security operations center or network operations center, I don't want 50 people staring at screens. We want to do it better. We want to do it more effectively. We want to do it more like industry is doing it. Because I cannot bring people into this organization into traditional roles. So CISA is also home to some of the best minds in cybersecurity and government. Some of them are here today. And I have to provide the best possible IT experience. There's nothing worse than starting a new job and your IT doesn't work. There's nothing worse than starting a new job at an IT agency and your IT doesn't work. Yeah, it's super embarrassing. And we had that when I started at CISA. So that's another area I'm really asking for industry help with. How do we get better? How do we deliver a highly secure and adaptable environment that really meets the needs of our users? And that's not different than any other CIO at DHS or across government. We're trying to deploy innovative solutions that protect our users in a new operating environment. I think the remote work, to the extent that we're doing it now, is still quite new. In some areas, we've done telework for, 20, 25 years. I still remember supporting dial-up users. But now it is not atypical for us to have people that never come to the office. That are starting their jobs, never coming to the office. So we're trying to ensure that we're enforcing security, down to that endpoint and that user, and that we're having a really seamless experience. Because for me in particular, I'm trying to do IT in an agency that does IT. And that's really challenging. It's kind of like being at OPM and being the Chico for OPM. The rest of the agency is telling you how to do your job. So what are some of the changes I've seen since the executive order came out? I think that there's been an increase in collaboration, across the FSEB. In particular, that's the area that CISA deals with. I think our endpoint detection and response initiative has gone very, very well and has really increased CISA's visibility into what's happening across the federal branches. I think some of the other areas that you've seen from CISA is an increased willingness to talk to industry. We're doing monthly industry days now. That were something that David Patrick introduced when he took over around the same time that I became the CIO. And that's very different than the way that NPPD operated. We want to talk to industry. We want to have effective engagement. I believe there's the cybersecurity is doing a 2-day industry day this month. We'll have a reverse industry day for my office around February. And these are kind of new things that have been driven as kind of ancillary effects of the executive order. Like, we need to be more collaborative. So I think collaboration has been one of the things that I've seen really increase. I think what we've also seen as a result of the executive order, and that's sometimes what we see from many executive orders, is attention at the highest levels of government. So I think that you've seen many CIOs now have a increased seat at the table, as well as CISOs and others that maybe didn't happen before, because now, as part of our performance measures, Well, it was always part of my performance measure being in IT, but, you're seeing secretaries, assistant secretaries and others asking really good questions about where are we in our implementation of this? What is zero trust? What are we doing to secure our systems? And I think that that's a very important effect of the executive order is the increased awareness of how critical it is that we're implementing some of these basic steps. I think a lot of us that maybe have a highly technical background, you read the executive order and you're like, why wouldn't anyone be doing these things already or already have a path to doing these things? Why wouldn't you have logging turned on? And I think what we see is that often happens quite often. IT systems are rolled out to serve a function. Security wasn't baked in from the start. And we really need to change that. And that's something that you'll see Director Easley speak about a lot. We need security from the start, baked in from the start of the project, start of development. And that's something that we really want to drive home at CISA. I think some of the other things that we're doing here at CISA, increased field involvement, which has been really phenomenal. A lot of people don't realize that CISA has a very large field organization for the size of the agency. We're about 2,500 feds or so. About 800 of them don't work in the DC area. They work out in our regions. Working every day with the private and public sector. And I think the executive order gave them a good blueprint. If you're talking to a state that maybe doesn't have as mature of a cyber program, that the executive order can be applied. It may not have the authority in other areas, but certainly the blueprint that it lays out is very effective as we're doing these engagements. I think some of the other areas that I'm always pushing towards is how do I make sure that CISA is really the role model for implementation of not just the executive order, but cybersecurity in general. And you can all imagine that's very hard. Those of you that have been through like an M&A activity or elsewhere, I'm trying to take an organization that ran disparate IT in very hardened silos, perhaps like as hardened as a missile silo, it seems at times. I was in the Air Force for a while, so we'll get some Air Force analogies there. But so we're trying to break down a lot of those different IT silos and groups and get them formed into an enterprise, while at the same time being very cognizant that CISA itself is a very big target. And I really need, one of my big challenges is speed to market. And that's often something that I've tried to change in my roles in government. I spent a lot of time at CBP in different roles, a lot of times at ICE and some time in private industry. And I think one of the things that I'm starting to see now is the government make a pivot to trying to work as fast as we would see in the private sector. I always say when someone tells me they're forming an IPT for a government project, I'm like, oh, we don't want that project to succeed. Yeah, I don't want my team sitting around spending a lot of time discussing how to do work. I want to do work in small increments. I want to increase the capacity to understand and accept failure. I think that that's super important because I think, as humans, we're not always as resilient as we could be. So I'm trying to get my team to be very resilient, to understand that, failure doesn't have to be a permanent setback. We learn from it and then move on. And so these are things that are really areas that I think we can learn from private industry on. A lot of these practices have been more keenly developed as out there than maybe they have in government, where we kind of are still maybe a little bit waterfall in our methodology and big bang on our delivery. And so those are the areas that I'm trying to take CISA. I think that one of the areas that we'd like to thank everyone for is, we are definitely seeing a lot of help from industry, and we really appreciate that. Whether that's from the researcher community or private industry in general, it's really been great. And I really appreciate all the help that's been delivered to me from all of you. I think with that, I wish you all a very wonderful day. I know it'll be, I looked at the speakers list and there's a lot of great people here today. And I think that you'll all get a lot from it. So thank you today.
Thank you. You got time for a question or two? Is that all right?
Sure.
I'm not gonna, there's no gotchas here.
Oh, well, we like gotchas. I can just choose
okay.
not to answer them.
Well, that's good. Yeah. How have you been able to leverage the cybersecurity executive order to get things that you felt like you needed?
For me, it's probably a little different. And you mentioned something with my very long title. I actually have an advantage over some other CIOs. I am not buried in the organization. I can go to Jen Easterly whenever I need something. Like she's a wonderful boss, but the CIO at CISA is a direct line to the front office. So I report to the deputy and then the director. I think what the executive order has helped others in government with is, this is no longer optional. We still see a lot of CIOs or CISOs too far down in the organization, even at very large agencies. And I think the executive order can give you, a good way to get the attention of the senior most agency leadership. Not to the extent that the CFO Act did years ago, but I think it certainly helped a lot of people.
Maybe time for one question? Yeah, make it a good one. It's the only one we're gonna get.
Okay, one good question. My name is Eric Florence. I'm from Veracode. And you mentioned that, your challenge was speed to market. And so what is the biggest blocker in your mind to that?
Well, that's a hard question. I see the press is here. I think that it's often fear. It is in there. Like I have often, I've been very privileged in my career to have bosses that were very supportive, and also bosses that have pulled me aside and said, you're on the wrong path, or don't be bureaucratic, Bob. I remember that from a boss at ICE many years ago. So I think sometimes speed to market can be delayed by the government processes and sometimes the way that we deem success in government. I think that's changing. I think that one of the ways that we're changing that is the acceptance of failure in a project. Like a project should have many failures and can still be deemed a success. Just because you have a deployment that goes bad, it shouldn't be a big deal. We'll work through it. And I think often sometimes, we'll see something happen in government and we'll just stop the project or go into a 6-month review. Sometimes that's required, depending on the systems that you're designing. Oftentimes it's not. So I think that it's changing the culture in a positive way to be very supportive. I think if you look at the CISA core values that are on our website, those really get to the root of this, that we're trying to change the culture internally to be very accepting, very diverse, but also to kind of look at things and say, it's okay. Like a mistake is okay. A failure is okay. I think we have, one of the things that I'm building up in my team too is we have to write good contracts. Like, if we put out a bad contract and then we're all wondering why it's not successful, that has to be a question that we ask. So I'm bringing in people that can help the most technical people write effective RFPs and other contract documents. And I think you need strong partnerships. Like, my job has changed over the years. And my old job used to be very important that me and the CISO were in alignment. Now, like, the CISO works for me. So my job is different. I need a strong relationship with the CFO, the CAE, the CHICO, and others to ensure that my job and that my organization can be successful. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
all. Have a wonderful day. Good to see you. Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. That was fantastic. Great way to start the day. We've got a couple of chairs over here. If we need to bring in new chairs, for those of you standing in back, we can get you. We got a couple of chairs. If you have an empty chair by you, can you stick your hand up? If you have an empty chair. Yeah, I think we got one up here for those sitting in the back. Kim, you going to help people out? All right. Moving on, we're going to do a brief tech talk, and it's on a topic, we're going to have Steve Briley with Venafi talking about secure supply chains. I don't think this was such a big issue until COVID, and we saw how important supply chains are. We just took everything for granted. You're going to have an Amazon package go to your front desk, but right now we're working on a project. We have a working group around this. We're working on a really exciting project with the DoD to on supply chain risk management. Like, how do I get my parts when there's a hurricane? How do I get my parts when there's a conflict going on? Supply chains, the shipping has been disrupted. So I think it's really elevated into our consciousness. Steve, you want to come up? All right. Yep, thank you. Okay, Steve, the solutions architect, sorry.
I'll cut you a break with not having a title as long as Bob's. All right, everybody hearing me okay? All right, let's get started. You guys have the presentation? There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Briley. I'm a solutions architect with Venafi. Today's presentation is on the roles of MPEs in the executive order. So a quick message about what Venafi's focus is. So Venafi is focused on machine identity protection. So people authenticate to machines using usernames and passwords. We use PIV cards, we use biometrics, but when machines need to authenticate to other machines, they use keys and certificates. And there's been a lot of focus on addressing the human identities, but the machine identities, those have gone largely ignored. And there's an exponential growth in the number of machines. So it really requires our attention. Okay, guys. I'm going password. There we go. So this exponential growth is due to the fact that we're in the information age, and machine is essentially classified as any digital asset. And it's such a broad category that in government, we refer to them as non-person entities or NPEs. And NPEs, they're everywhere. Virtual machines, information artifacts, services, applications, containers. These are all common examples of NPEs, and their identities can be represented in the form of TLS certificates, SSH keys and certificates, code signing certificates. You have JSON tokens, you have SPIFFE IDs. And we see that in the executive order that NPEs play an important role in supply chain security. And in a software supply chain, essentially, NPEs are creating NPEs. And so it's important to ensure that the code's integrity has not been compromised and that its provenance can be established. And code signing certificates are what provide us with that assurance. And then despite the fact that digital signing is a step that a lot of agencies do to improve supply chain security, it's not new. A lot of agencies don't know when the code is being signed, how often, for what purpose, by whom. They often don't know who has access to the private keys that are used for code signing. And there's an inability to enforce policy or show compliance. And when it's not done properly, that opens the door for the adversary to take advantage. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's referred to shifting left. This is where the focus shifts from compromising the release software to focusing on the build pipeline and the build environments. And so in response to the increased supply chain threat, we need to ensure that the software that's used to build software is trustworthy and it's gone through the same scrutiny as the software your team is building. And along with that recommendation of signing everything, it's going to be increasingly important that there's strong controls around the private keys that are used to facilitate the code signing. So we continue to hear many stories from developers that have their own ad hoc processes around how they handle their code signing private keys. And so there's 4 important points that I'd like to make when it comes to securing private keys. So avoid the private key sprawl by protecting those private keys in HSMs or secured storage. The private keys should never be on the build server. Establish policies for how, when, and where code signing keys can be utilized for signing. Implement an approval process for high-value software releases. And then, of course, restrict people from accessing the private keys. And securing the build pipeline also means that we should be able to distinguish between the different contributors within the software development pipeline. And so this requires that every developer should have their own unique GPG signing key. So we also want to leverage unique code signing certificates per software project. So in many cases, organizations, they'll have multiple software projects that include running internally trusted software as well as releasing external applications. So in those types of scenarios, leverage unique certificates per unique case. So ideally, each contributor, they're able to sign their own commits, and every commit and each project should minimally have its own code signing certificate. So best practice number 5 is to establish and enforce usage personas. So the 4 personas mentioned here provide a strong framework for how to establish and enforce segregation of duties. So you have an administrator that essentially defines the project requirements. You have code signing users, and these could be humans or machines that perform these signing operations. You have approvers that are there for specific exceptions or high value software releases. And then you have an auditor that's there that's able to report compliance. All right, additional resources. So my time is almost up, but since securing the supply chain securing the supply chain is not a trivial task, I wanted to leave you with some additional resources that are available at no cost. So I'll put up some QR codes to these in just a second, but on the left, we have an interactive guide that encompasses software supply chain security recommendations from various respected sources. It categorizes them by the different focus areas and then prioritizes that guidance. And then on the right, there's a link where you can sign up for a no-cost pipeline risk assessment from the experts identified. And that concludes our segment for today. But we've included the QR codes linked here to the resources that I shared, along with a couple other guides that are fitting into the zero trust planning. So we're also here in the back. So if you have any questions, come see us.
Steve, I got a quick question before you leave. And we've been working with Ross Ford on this machine to machine thing. So I'm getting to a little be an expert since he's like with CISA and I just take whatever he gives me.
I'm familiar with Ross.
5G security is going to be a big deal. So I'm going to be connecting to all these devices. It's a lot different topology than we had with 4G and with regular networks. What do you see is some of the bigger challenges we're going to have as we move to that topology?
Well, you know, with 5G, yes, there's more connectivity, higher speeds, more devices. Really it's just going to make the number of machines there more prevalent. You know, the more machines that you have, the management of those machine identities is going to be more burdensome. Right now you've got these identities, but a lot of times we see people have them for extremely long links. So you need to determine, well, how long is this system going to communicate? How long does it need access to what it has access to? And all of that requires management of those identities. And it's just going to be a bigger problem as we see more and more regulation around around these certificates, the links of those certificates, and complying with zero trust. All right.
Okay, if I can bring the next panel up, we've had a little bit of a change. Chris Riota, who prepped up this panel and got us all set, was sick this morning. And we don't come in the office sick anymore. So we decided that's okay. Wish him well. So I'm going to sub. Fortunately, we've got a big panel and everybody can come on up, and we'll do some introductions and we'll get right into it. I've got some questions. And we've been dealing with this on about 45 webinars since the Cybersecurity Executive Order. So hopefully I'll be okay here. Great, everybody sit down. We've got a mic at the end too. This may be the biggest panel we've ever had in ATARC history. So it's probably gonna be one of the best ones we've ever had too. All right, I'm gonna do some quick introductions and then, well, I'll tell you what, I'm not gonna do introductions. We don't have time. You can read this. We got a little bit old people's eyes, Kim. We're gonna have to work on that. I don't know if everybody can see it, but we'll get that out to you. But I'm just gonna go right into it. And maybe we'll start off with you, Lisa.
Sure.
Yes. I can actually see that. But it's interesting. I think we were working with Eric Mill, who I think you know Eric, right?
Yeah,
So
very
when this first came out, I called him up like 5 minutes after it came out. I said, "Hey, speak at an ATARC event," and he did. So it was fantastic. But love to hear your perspectives and a little bit about your office. I'm not sure everybody's exactly aware of your office that you're working in now, and some of the things that about the executive order from your perspective.
Yeah, great. Is this just on automatically? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
just get close to it. Yep. It's as close as reasonable.
I'm not going to get too close to it. I don't want to blare anything. So Lisa Barm, the Director for Federal Cybersecurity in the Office of National Cyber Director. The Office of National Cyber Director is one of the newest organizations in the EOP, what we affectionately call the EOP, the Executive Office of the President. It's run by Director Chris Inglis. I'm sure that many of you probably recognize him in the name. He's a phenomenal leader for our organization. One of his strongest principles is assume noble intent. And he's carried that forward in our entire organization with the people that he brings in, as well as a perspective that we bring both to broader cybersecurity as well as the federal cybersecurity. I work directly for Chris DeRusha, who most of you know also, I'm sure. He likes to affectionately say that he has two hats. One is the deputy for federal cybersecurity within the Office of the National Cyber Director, and the other is the federal CISO. We like to think that he has two hats, but he really has one mission, which is focusing on how do we improve the cybersecurity across the federal enterprise. That's a lot. And it's a pretty large mission space. The cybersecurity EO has been out for a year and a half now, May of 2021. And what we continue to see is that even though it's been sitting out there for a year and a half, and sometimes when EOs come out, there's sort of a checklist of things that you do, and then you're done with them and they get put to the side. What we see with the EO is that the sons and daughters of the EO are continuing, and they're continuing to be pushed out across federal departments and agencies. We're continuing to see a priority across federal departments and agencies. As Bob Costello was saying, there are more secretaries and deputy secretaries that our directors having conversations with about multi-factor authentication, encryption, endpoint detection, all these sorts of things, so that it's increasing the dialogue and the priority and pressure that's being placed on departments and agencies. So I guess I don't want to take up too much time, but what I would say is that, the intent of the EO, obviously, yes, was to try and change the mindset a little bit of how the federal government was working in terms of cybersecurity. But more importantly, it was to be able to set the federal enterprise up for success, meaning we wanted to be able to put forward a vision, a presence, a future where the federal government is actually taking leading strides in cybersecurity, and it's not solely, sort of being on the reactive receiving end all the time.
Great. That's a perfect start. And speaking of the receiving end is our CIOs and CISOs out there. Maybe we'll start off with you, Jamie, as the CIO of PTO. You see all these orders come through. How does it change your game plan? How has it altered it? Has it complemented it? Just love to hear your opening comments.
Yeah, I really like the fact that the executive order raised the awareness and it created the sensitivity that all these old systems, the old moat and castle is no longer acceptable. And I think that's a good way to move forward and mature your organization along the 5 pillars. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is everybody's stuck in the fact that, you know, we've got to protect our inside. Well, there is no more inside. Everything's outside. There's no such thing as protecting it all. The firewall is dead. And so because of that, you have to protect all of your assets. And I like the Venafi thing. Everybody's putting all this effort into personal identity and user identity. What about machine identity? Everybody's just accepting that. And that's not the way to look at it along the 5 pillars. So I think it's a monumental step forward, and to change culture, to change the way people think, especially the cybersecurity industry in the federal government. Oh my gosh, right? No, we've done it this way and it works. Damn it. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Great. Can we go next to Kimberly?
Yep.
And how do you say your last name?
Gayevsky.
Kayevsky. Yep. Okay.
It's gonna be a quiz.
Yeah, well, I wasn't on the prep call. Usually that's the first thing I ask. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thanks.
Can't wait to
Yeah.
hear your comments.
So here representing DHS headquarters, I think that, you know, from a perspective of EO, to Lisa's point, we are, as a federal government, starting to walk our talk with a little bit more seriousness, a little more earnestness, and I think the EO really helped put us into that position. I'll, you know, say also to the extent of longevity and the sons and daughters, I like that actually, sons and daughters. One of the things I'll highlight is the Cyber Safety Review Board, which is a really innovative public-private partnership. One of the things we're most proud of is that this new partnership stood up, looked at the Log4j vulnerability and really developed a very comprehensive and action-oriented report on things, best practices, things we could have done differently, lessons learned, and put those together into a series of recommendations that we are now holding ourselves accountable for actually implementing and moving out on. So to the point of really going beyond just what the EO might have ordered initially, this CSRB has grown, thrived, and we are actually actively looking kind of for our second topic to pursue. So look for that in, you know, hopefully the coming months. But it is very much an enduring body, very much an enduring approach to figuring out a way to partner with private sector, as Bob said in his keynote, to be more collaborative in the ways that we learn from incidents as they occur and move forward such that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over again due to a lack of communication from private sector and federal government.
Great. Now let's shift over to Amy. And Amy has a long title. I'll add one. She is the co-chair of our Zero Trust group at ATARC. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom. And I think the executive order, like many pieces of policy, just kind of reinforces again what we should focus on. But the significant shift was what was already mentioned, moving away from that net-centric approach. And I would argue net-centric never worked. If you've ever read The Cuckoo's Egg, it was all about an adversary coming in, having cracked a password, escalating privileges, traversing laterally. Turns out it involves foreign spies. It turned out that was 1987. So just saying it has not worked, continues to not work, and we're finally recognizing it. So from the Department of Energy, where that Cuckoo's Egg was actually set at our Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, we've recognized this for a while. We've had some laboratories that say they were doing zero trust before even the term was coined. And you have a whole bunch of smart PhDs and then we'll argue this for hours. So just don't bother. And so the whole key though is how do we keep it going? How do we keep the momentum? And I think a real shift with this executive order is it has had legs. A lot of times it will come out, like Lisa mentioned, it's a checklist. Lisa and I started working 100,000 years together after the Secure Technology Act. Everyone acts like supply chain's a new thing. So we're sort of like, okay, but in this time, people are actually listening. The partnership is there, and the administration and Congress are actually working together, because I think what we've recognized is our adversaries don't care. They don't care the branch of the government we're in. They don't care the agency that we're in. The adversary will continue to attack. They will go after our information. They may do it for different reasons, whether it's our intellectual property, whether it's to attack our OT systems and to create nefarious activities. We have to improve or we are going to lose. Thank you, Tom.
Great. Thank you. Now we're going to move over to the military with Drew Malloy. And Drew, I did see this morning that Thunderdome's going to be ramping up. If you can add a little color, everybody's really curious about that little project, the Zero Trust project that you're doing, especially our Zero Trust group.
Sure, yeah, so Thunderdome was a project that we started probably, we started kind of the idea development of it during the pandemic when classically, and folks who don't know, just as an agency, what we do, we operate kind of the core backbone networks, all the enterprise services for the military and all the cybersecurity capabilities as well that are at the enterprise level. So for us, seeing the evolution of developing this perimeter model, right? And with mid-tier security with endpoint, and all of the data was sitting in data centers that were sitting on our networks. All of the data was sitting in, all the users were sitting on our networks. And so everyone was happy, right? About 10 years ago, cloud started to become a thing, and now our data started moving off-prem. And so we kind of tweaked our architecture a little bit to move out through some cloud access points to the cloud, but still had that core infrastructure that we've always had. And then the pandemic came and all the users were off our networks now. So now we don't have the users there. Now we don't have the data there. Does it really make sense to keep going down this architectural mindset? And so we kind of took a step back. We were developing, we had just published the Zero Trust Reference Architecture in conjunction with the NSA. And we said, all right, how do we start to apply this, right? How do we start to kind of live what we preach and go about this from a zero trust perspective? That's really where Thunderdome came into play. A lot of what we were doing with Office 365, with the Flow 3 conversations, from how do you get direct cloud-based access when you're sitting out on the internet, so that we aren't artificially piping you through our network security tools in order to get you over to the cloud, which is affecting performance greatly. And how do we do it in a more secure fashion? So we developed Thunderdome, a number of capabilities that essentially a lot of the core principles were around how do we get strong identity, strong encryption as a core? How do we look at making access control decisions based off the user, based off the device, based off the network segment, things of that nature? And then how do we start to push our security stacks to where it makes the most sense? How do we push it closer to the application and the data? How do we push it closer down to the user? We don't want to do this mid-tier network break and inspect and inspecting traffic at that point, which is also affecting performance. Where do we do it where it's naturally, the encryption is naturally broken at the application layer and at the user layer to start to get that telemetry back? So that's really been the change in the number of capabilities that we've brought out with Thunderdome. And right now we are in the operational assessment phase, looking for January to do a full appeal and decision on that capability to roll it out at an enterprise level.
That's going to be really exciting. For those of you that don't know, ATARC has a zero trust lab, and the government, and Amy was a big part of that, and a lot of other government folks came up with some use cases, and industry answered them. Well, we probably thought we'd get like 15 to 20 companies in the lab. We ended up with 60 some. So we've been doing presentations, for each of the capabilities. But what we learned really quickly is that it's going to take a solution for an agency that's customized. So I give this a lot of credit. This is the first one that I know that's really nearing some sort of completion. It's a very difficult program, but usually it's going to be a combination of many companies that have to kind of come together to come up with a solution. So we're going to be doing that in the next phase of our zero trust group. Demonstrations is more of that kind of like, I got to pull this company and that company together.
So we're looking for company partnerships right now and taking submissions. So if you are interested, please go ahead and let us know. But what we're very interested in is those partnerships, because everybody has a lot of individual solutions. But if you're coming to us with a proposal with 2 or more companies together, that is definitely getting our interest.
Yep. Thank you for that.
I will say, I guess I'll put stump this, sorry to interrupt, but this is something that I always kind of try to emphasize when I'm speaking about this is interoperability is going to be key.
Yeah.
Right? There's no one product out there that's going to solve all of this for us, even though some people will say it is not true. And some of the capabilities that we're integrating into our architecture are new and they're very forward leaning, but that also means that there is a lack of standards. There's a lack of interoperability, and that's always a risk for us moving forward. So, and whenever we have to do things in order to compensate for interoperability, we just usually open up security risk into our architecture. So that's key is getting industry in and looking at the interoperability piece.
Yeah. Well, that's a good lead into Ryan Gillis, who's Vice President of Cybersecurity Strategy and Global Policy at Palo. And I saw global policy as very interesting. What is the rest of the world doing? What is industry doing? And I know you are going to definitely address federal government, but welcome.
Sure. Thanks so much. So I think it's useful to take a quick step back. The genesis of the executive order is something that I think this administration has done very well in a number of instances, which is to take operational lessons and best practices from things that we have seen in the real world, and then drive in new cybersecurity habits, best practices, behaviors. So if you think about the genesis of the EO, it was lessons learned from the SolarWinds attack. And so what we saw within that directly led, for example, to Section 3, which is enhancing security of federal networks. It includes things like implementation of zero trust. It also includes a lot of the basics that we've known for a long time, but were laid bare as not being implemented, things like multi-factor authentication, encryption, some of those basics we've seen there. Section 4 implements a requirement for software supply chain security. Again, that was at the starting point of what happened with SolarWinds was Russian infiltration of a software update for an IT tool that was SolarWinds that was deployed and led to unfettered access across 9 US government agencies for up to a period of 9 months, and arguably wouldn't have been revealed in December of 2019, I think it was, had they not gotten greedy and pivoted into the private sector and gone after tech and cybersecurity companies. Within that, Section 7 is a requirement for deployment of EDR solutions across the entire FSEM. The lesson learned there was, for example, as we as a company were targeted by Russian intelligence as part of the SolarWinds attack, it was the user behavioral analytics within our XDR endpoint tool that said our software servers are supposed to do, our SolarWinds servers were supposed to do X through Y of these functionalities. When that software started behaving in an anomalous way, it was that action that allowed us to automatically take that server offline and respond to it. And so I think what we've seen here within the EO is the implementation of those real world lessons learned. We've seen it time and again where Colonial Pipeline leads to an enhanced focus on things like ransomware and the real implications of lack of security implementation across critical infrastructure. So
Great. Thank you for that. Cole, do you mind going to Kim? We need some more chairs in here. We got a late arriving crowd. We'll get you taken care of in the back. Okay, my first question. I always bring it to this because it's like great to be back in person. This is probably the first time I haven't mentioned the pandemic at a live event. So I know the week of pandemic, if you can picture it, we were actually in this room. It was around DevOps, and it was Tuesday of the week before we closed everything. We had about 200 people. We were kind of fist bumping, and that was the last event we had for 2.5 years. So you started to take it for granted. But how has the pandemic impacted the ways you and your organization deal with threats? How has that changed things permanently? Maybe we start off with you, Lisa, and how did it affect the executive order, if at all?
It's a good question. Our office was stood up really out of the National Defense Authorization Act of 21, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think Director Inglis came on in July of 21. So we almost came into existence sort of post-pandemic, if you will. But with the recognition, of course, that we couldn't really come together as an organization or an entity in sort of one place. So how do you build an organization and a culture while still trying to be cognizant of everything that's sort of going on around you? Obviously, the cybersecurity EO came out sort of in May. So sort of, again, sort of pre-NCD, I would say pre-ONCD, but there, as Ryan said, there was a recognition of a lot of the best practices and work and problems that we were seeing were built into that EO. So I don't have a good answer for necessarily how the pandemic impacted the EO. I think it's more about the culture and the organization, the people around the EO that may have been impacted more than necessarily like the technology themselves.
Right. Amy?
I think a significant thing between the pandemic and the EO is this relationship and recognition that people live outside the perimeter. And if you look at, the physical analogy that I've probably overused, but the moat and castle didn't work in physical space either. It's been around since ancient Egypt, and kings, queens, pharaohs, they had a good time, but the people on the hillsides, they just got slaughtered, right? And so if you look at what does that mean in your hybrid environment, it means that those people who are outside the perimeter are not protected. And so it's finally recognizing in the executive order and really pushing away from that net-centric approach, or really saying, hey, you know what, like we have to recognize people are going to work where they want and do what they want, and finally recognize the technology. Because before, what would happen is we would try to put these draconian measures in place, and then the users spent all of their time trying to work around it rather than understanding the security and why we're trying to help them. So now it's really moving into a model of us understanding users have to come first. We have to recognize that, and then basing it on what the users are doing, how do we design our security around it? Some really great concepts came up here, and people say, how do you implement zero trust? And it's got to be one step at a time. We've been doing a series of TTXs at our organization, and what we found is we have the ability to use certificates on our devices, and we just haven't been doing it. And you could easily just take a device certificate and say, have your application both authenticate the device and then the human entity. And that's one more way of doing protection. So we've had these things out there, and some of them are low cost or no cost. We haven't done it. And I think our keynote did a great job of highlighting the fact that a lot of the things are basic cybersecurity that we should be doing and that we don't. And I'll be an advocate for my field offices when it comes to things like, okay, the bar has just been raised and now we have to take all our FSMA systems and put MFA on it. That used to not be there, and it's expensive. So I will advocate for resources to get this done. But on the other hand, when they're like, well, we shouldn't, all this software, and I'm like, no, you signed an ATO saying you know this. You should know this. This is what we're signing up for. And the American people trust us to do this. So I think a lot of it is let's, really do those things that we say that we've been doing all along.
Great. Kimberly?
Yeah, I'd say the pandemic was an interesting accelerant in a lot of ways for the US government. It really brought forward a lot of conversations that we had started having about workforce locations, the remote work, and some of the challenges there, and it really put those front and center. There was no longer an option to postpone that conversation or to do a lengthy analysis of what that looks like. It was, this is real, this is now, and if we don't figure this out correctly, not only does the cybersecurity mission be hindered across the US government, but also all of the other core government functions too, right? So it really brought cybersecurity and successfully transitioning to a very remote workforce front and center. And so it was a very interesting accelerant that brought, I think, the government leaps and bounds ahead of where we would have been had that not been the force case for it. So.
Great, thank you. Drew?
Yeah, I think accelerant is probably a good term for what really became of it once we were very network centric in our cybersecurity posture. And then once the endpoints started to move off of our networks, we started to lose a lot of visibility. We were a little bit more comfortable with our endpoints on our networks, kind of doing that configuration management, patching and everything like that. Once we moved off, then there was a lack of visibility that we were a little bit more uncomfortable with. And then looking at VPNs being the solution, but that wasn't a great solution, right? Yeah. So for us, it was accelerating what we're doing at the endpoint layer, bringing in capabilities like EDR to help with that detection at the endpoint layer, and then looking at as we've marched towards this heightened posture for cybersecurity, we in the DoD are also tackling a lot of conceptions around the performance of endpoints, right, and the performance of the network, and we can't just continue to go down the route of having security in a silo and doing things in spite of the performance of the actual applications, and preventing people from doing their jobs, because that's when they figure out workarounds, and they start using personal devices and to get around what we have in place. So for us, it was really looking at how do we gain more visibility to the endpoints that are now off of our networks, and then how do we reconfigure our architecture to make sure that the performance is a lot better, and we get rid of those security vulnerabilities.
Great, thank you. Jamie?
I hated the pandemic. Sucked. And the reason was because 8,000 of my 14,000 people were remote before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I had a core differentiator within the federal government. I could actually recruit for remote work. Now everybody knows I can do it, so I just can't do that anymore. That's my answer.
That's great. Ryan?
Yeah, so I echo a lot of these remarks. What we saw from the industry side was the shift of users in an accelerated way. I think the webinar joke throughout the pandemic was that the pandemic is our chief innovation officer, and we certainly saw that play out. So as a company, we had shifted from traditional firewall approach or from a traditional firewall stack to a heavy investment. I think we had just made investment in 14 companies over the 4 years leading into the pandemic. A lot of that was cloud security as well as SASE. And that's where the users migrated. At the start of the pandemic, there were certain organizations we helped transition 60,000 users over the initial weekend. We saw a lot more over time of a strategic investment into cloud. And within that, you needed the ability to secure those cloud workloads. I do think it's important to call out from the beginning that within Section 3 of the executive order that calls for zero trust, it was important, I think, that it set off, I like that sons and daughters line, because there was a series of work streams that occurred. First, it moved into what is zero trust actually, because to date, zero trust had been a marketing term that every single vendor said, I am zero trust. And in actuality, the answer is, I think, as others have said, it's not a single technology, it's the implementation of processes, procedures combined with technology, done so in a way where you don't trust anything or anyone on your network. That led to Chris DeRusha and team leading the Zero Trust Federal Strategy. We've seen the NIST NCCOE lab, which is now working through the process, ATARC obviously as well. I think Thunderdome is going to be a great harbinger and a model for real operational implementation, not in a theoretical environment, but that actualizing what zero trust can be, and the fact that it wasn't applied only to networking, but was applied holistically across the environment to include SASE, to include cloud, all the way down to the endpoint, is an important thing that I think was done well through the EO.
Yeah, great. I know within ATARC, we've worked on technology for a long time, and it's fantastic. Two things that I'm starting to realize, it takes me a little while to figure this out. Workforce and acquisition are two of some of our biggest issues. Let's go with the workforce. How do you think, how do you think the cybersecurity workforce in the federal government is going? How's your agency tackled issues with training and reskilling and really retention too? How do you incentivize people to stay? And we'll start off with you, Amy.
Thank you. I think that all the agencies are really struggling when it comes to cybersecurity talent, and there's a lot of discuss, and we've had a lot of support from the White House on the pipeline issues. Statistically, when you look at the numbers, the projections are not great across the United States. We're just kind of focused on that. But I think even globally that we're not going to have enough cybersecurity practitioners. We continue to feel that every single day. So how do you get people to want to come? And then the number one thing I think the value is mission. Why do you want to come work for the government where you're going to make less money and not have nearly as many opportunities? And we do not have soda machine fountains and things in our break rooms. So why do you want to come work in a very old building? It is because we have one of the coolest missions in the world. At the Department of Energy, we have a nuclear mission, we have a power mission, we have a mission of open science that has been going on since before the Manhattan Project. And when you look at that and you can go someplace and say, oh, look, this is an original Tesla coil and this is the chair that Oppenheimer sat in, that's our biggest selling point. So if you would like to come work at the Department of Energy, just please link into me and I'll talk to you about it. You will not get great pay, but you will have a mission that will excite you every day.
Lisa, yeah, that's great. Lisa, from my understanding, everybody in government is tripping over themselves to go on detail to work for you. So I don't know if you, I don't know. And one note about your leader.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
Please, we are always accepting people at the ONCD
So we-
to grow from.
So maybe take the cross-government perspective, right?
Sure. So when I first came on detail to the ONCD, and now I'm current, but when I first came on, we went through a series of discussions with CIOs and CISOs. I think we met with all of the CFO Act agencies, CIOs and CISOs to talk with them about what do they think about the EO? What are some of the biggest challenges that they're seeing with implementing zero trust? Where do they need some help? Where can they use some influence, some support, and sort of what could our office be doing better? There's two things that consistently came out of all those conversations, and it won't be surprising, I don't think. And one was, if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, and please stop giving us more priorities. Noted. Yes, we try our best. But the other two things that came up were, we don't have the resources and we don't have the talent to do the things you want us to do. We can't necessarily reprioritize because everything's a priority. So how do we implement zero trust? How do we implement the actions that are coming out of the EO while recognizing that we don't have the resource or the workforce or the technical talent to do this? We don't have the funding. So our office took that to heart, and there is a workforce strategy that's being built and developed. There was an RFI that was put out. I'm sure there was lots of individuals, perhaps even in this room, who provided feedback on that, and that's an ongoing process. The other thing that we tried to do was think about, well, if we need more funding, what do we need to do to sort of enhance that? And so our office partnered with the Office of Management and Budget and came out with what we call the FY24 spring priorities or spring budget memo, which was intended to have departments and agencies resource against certain priorities, one of them being zero trust. It's not going to be the end all be all answer, but it does start to reshape the way the federal government is looking at acquiring support and services to meet the priorities that are clearly outlined in the EO and zero trust strategy.
Great, thank you. Kim?
First, I'll say, if you guys are interested in working at DHS headquarters, we have a new building. So, you know, putting that out there, not in a stuffy basement. It is in Anacostia though, so. But so I think for us, we're recognizing that in addition to kind of saying out loud that we have a workforce challenge, we really needed to add specificity. Like, what types of workforce, what types of challenges should we be looking at addressing? And what types of workforce do we need? So we're seeing now, and this is true across the federal government, a diversification of different types of programs to get at different pieces of the workforce challenges. So for DHS, two examples, one that our office is definitely taking to heart, right, is the initial recent graduate pipeline, exposing them to mission, exposing them to why it's so important. So we heavily leverage programs like the Scholarship for Service program to bring in those very recent graduates, to expose them to the benefits of working in government, some of the downsides, but also kind of what that mission is, and get the flavor of the different pieces of the federal government, how they work together. And then for, deeper talent acquisition, kind of post-graduation, we also have a program called Cyber Talent Management System, CTMS, which has been a little bit slower to roll out than probably we would have liked. But it is another kind of venue that we're acknowledging and recognizing that we really needed to kind of break the way we hired people and the GS system that we put them on, to be a little bit more innovative and figure out how we can be more competitive with industry. We'll never be as competitive as industry, but how we can be more competitive and truly offer people opportunities to come into government and then ladder and grow their skills such that, they are still maintaining relevancy, maintaining the latest certifications, not just coming into government and stagnating. So I would highlight those two kinds of things. And then there's also an acknowledgement of not just working with workforce to kind of get people into government, but also partnerships. How do we partner with workforce that may never actually want to come work for us, but to achieve a common mission. So one of the Cyber Safety Review Board recommendations was looking for opportunities to partner with open source software developers and figuring out how those types of communities we can partner together to bolster security of open source software through collaborative partnerships, through opportunities to, either provide them funding, training, exposure, why it matters, those types of opportunities. So it's not just about recruiting talent into the government, but it's also acknowledging the talent that exists outside of government, how to leverage them to also bolster kind of the same core mission sets that are aligned across, whether you're in government or private sector.
Great, thank you for that. Drew?
I was kind of waiting to hear what Jamie was going to say. But I'll take a crack at it. So I think partnerships are going to be key, right? We have to live with the constraints that we're given, and government hiring is not as agile. We can't offer the money, but we can offer the mission. And to be honest, working for the government is not for everyone. But I think if we become more agile in how we hire, if we have those partnerships with industry, and if industry wants to look at doing a 3 to 5 year term within the government and going back out, we are no longer in the business of growing 30 to 40 year civil servants. We have to leverage the talent that is out there. And then looking at the partnerships to say, there are very talented people out there. How do I get them working on my mission, even if they are not on my payroll? And that's going to be tricky, right? And that is going to involve a lot of thinking differently on how we contract things, how we bring folks into the work, and how we think differently on partnering with industry. But to me, we aren't going to be able to fill this gap organically. So we have to start thinking differently, and we have to start looking at some of that, some of the folks out there with alternative backgrounds that, we don't need engineers. We don't need computer scientists. We don't need people who can, it checks a box that you took differential equations 20 years ago that you have no recollection of that class whatsoever, right? Speaking for a friend, not for me. So, and some of the smartest people that I've worked with in my career have high school diplomas. In no way, we can't keep continuing to box ourselves in with have to have certifications, have to have degrees, have to have everything like that. We have to start thinking differently if we're going to start tackling this.
Amen. Thinking differently, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem. Dr. Pollard, I think DOE, Manhattan Project, the arrogance of success is to think that what worked for you yesterday will make you successful tomorrow, right? So why in the world, and the OPM director said this recently, why are we applying 60-year-old policies to recruiting in the 2020s? That is ridiculous. We're not fighting the same wars. I mean, I hope, and I was part of the military establishment, the fact of the matter is we always were fighting last war, right?
Yeah.
Get out of that. Get into the asymmetric warfare, figure out information. The history, if you don't know it and understand how we adapted, you're bound to repeat the same mistakes. And we're repeating them every day. Let's go out and recruit and let's get the certifications. Why? Why in the world are you putting your mission based on a federal workforce? Let's really look at what's going on. Who in their right mind would work for the federal government when you can make loads of money and get a lot more experience out in the commercial sector? Heck, I don't want my kids working for the federal government. I want them going out and really getting in, digging out, right? Now, military is a little different. That's the mission part of things. So to think that we're going to get a federal workforce of entry-level people coming in is pipe dream, right? Where do you get this workforce? So 30, 40 years, it's no longer going to happen. So what is our federal workforce going to be composed of? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but we can't keep thinking that we're going to have a hierarchical model. So what I've done is I've taken the old OPM because I know, you don't want to spit in the wind, right? It just doesn't work. So, and just work with the HR and stuff. But every day, that hierarchical model, I have now detailed everybody into a box. And what is that box? They work as a team, much like special forces. The Army realized that unless you're at war and you have lines of defense and everything, right? Huge, traditional war, the big old Army does not work. You have to have special operations, you have to have special units, and they have to be specialized and yet general at the same time. And that's what the federal workforce needs to be. We need to be specialized and general at the same time. But our secret sauce that could really work is our contractors. We can bring in the talent when we need to. The problem is procurement will let us. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that, right? It's crazy. And the procurement life cycles are ridiculous. The biggest problem we have in the government, sorry, and maybe this will be a segue into your procurement stuff. But the fact of the matter is there's no incentive for a contracting officer to take a risk. None. That's what we need. We need to be able to get our procurement and the methodology quicker, better, cheaper, and faster. I could talk all day. Sorry.
Yeah. Ryan?
I love following this guy.
I know, it's great. I think I'd rather be before.
Yeah. So,
true.
we participated in the workforce summit that was convened by Director Inglis. Again, I think a hat tip to him and the office, leveraging the convening power of the White House to drive to a critical issue. One of the big areas of focus, and I'll just sort of preview our own submission from that RFI that we submitted last week. ONCD talks a lot about 700,000 open jobs within this country, open cyber jobs within this country. Building exactly off of Jamie and others have said, I am certain that a large part of those are tier 1 and tier 2 SOC analysts, for example. So you're trying to recruit from a younger generation of digital natives that are looking for interesting mission, and then you're going to put them in jobs where they have to correlate alerts manually before they can actually do anything. SOC automation, SOAR capabilities do that right now. We can automate out a tremendous number of those jobs, and that's not displacing a workforce that already exists right now. That's making people more effective in responding to incidents. So as a company, for example, in implementing SOAR technology, we've got our SOC down to responding to 9 incidents per day, nine events. And what we had gone from was this massive funnel of alerts that had to be correlated by individuals, and instead are far more efficiently done through automation, where individuals then are focused on response to the event themselves. So we ought to be training people for jobs that are most effective and efficient, leveraging automation. That will shrink that number of 700,000 jobs to a certain number. I don't know what it is, but it's exactly fighting the last war. It is the old DoD model of putting a ton of butts in seats with contractors and with government employees to manually do work that doesn't keep up with the speed of adversary attacks that are increasingly automated. So that's where we see sort of those things going. Also, I think it's important to talk about the need for diversity into this workforce issue. So again, just from Palo Alto Networks, we co-sponsored or sponsored with the Girl Scouts cybersecurity badges. 300,000 girls across the United States have been trained on cybersecurity badges K through 12 to address not only the gender diversity issue, but that's in every zip code around the country. So it gets into the broader diversity issues that we see across the cybersecurity workforce as well.
We've got time for maybe 2 questions. Okay. Mr. Florence.
Yes, Eric Florence here. I wanted to know, since the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates and causing a lot of the private sector to now, I guess, let a lot of people go. Do you guys have strategies to take on those people who are coming onto the market?
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't really seen that shakeout yet. We are in constant mode of hiring and sending out different job postings. So I would say that's definitely something that we're looking at, and we're also seeing that retention is starting to get, exodus has slowed down quite a bit, because folks who were who were a little jealous of their friends who, who had soda machines in the break room and were driving new Teslas. All of a sudden, their friends are starting to worry about their job. So they're getting a little bit more conservative and staying put. And so that is beneficial to us, not wanting to state, the overall health of the economy, but that's something that we really haven't seen shake out yet in our advertisements as an increase in applications just yet. But there's a potential for that to happen.
Any more questions? Great.
Cheryl Quinter, Department of Agriculture. I've heard a lot this morning about a paradigm shift and really looking at the way we implement our security, we work with our workforce. What resources are you in leading the government looking at providing agencies so that we can help shift from a compliance mindset to a proactive? How can we get assessments or help in implementing zero trust so that we can really be innovative and not be so focused on, well, I can't do that because it doesn't line with a memorandum or a guidance that we have there, but really let us be leading edge in shifting the way that we think.
I will, I'll give the perspective, at least from the EOP, and then I'd be interested in your perspective because as a fee for service entity in the conversation we were having, I think you have a slightly different perspective on sort of this, but I don't think that there's there's not a simple solution to this, right? We know that the program planning, budgeting, execution cycle for the federal government doesn't work to address the needs that we have as an enterprise. Our office does work really closely with the Office of Management and Budget because of the fact that we have both Chris DeRusha that sits on both sides. He understands both the budgeting and the technology piece, which is super helpful. It led to the release of a memo that's intended to inform at least FY24, but we also recognize that what you're doing right now is likely going to be influencing your 25, 26 budgets. And it's hard to sort of even now to try and get money aligned for 24 to meet the things that you're supposed to already be doing or be doing by 24, right? So you have like this tail, if you will. I think that it starts a lot of the times though with conversations at the deputy and the secretary level, at the administrative level, because we can't keep having administrators who reshuffle resources to meet mission needs. That takes away from cyber and information technology budgets. You start cutting from that and pulling from that to apply to other areas. And perhaps this is not maybe the best thing to be saying right now, but you don't get them the support that you need for the programs that you need to meet the requirements that are being placed on you on a daily basis. We're going to get there. There's a lot of things that we're looking at. We're looking at some studies and things like that to look at cyber funding, cyber spending, that sort of thing. But I'd be very interested in the perspective from the fee for service model and how you all do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So fee for service means I do not take 1 penny of taxpayer money. We are totally funded by the fees that we collect. We've been doing it for over 200 years. We have models that help us out on the demand and supply. In other words, we don't charge what it costs us up front because we want applicants to, we want to spur incentive, right? So we try to charge at least up front. What we do is we get funded back in the years that anybody is awarded a patent or registered a trademark. So about year 5 on a trademark, about year 7 on a patent, that's when we break even. All right, saying that though, I have a fiduciary to the fee payer, not the taxpayer. And the thing is, I wish that our leaders had the courage to do what I'm doing. And it's really simple. It's logical. If you have a budget and the budget is in this box, and then you say, well, no, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, you got to put it in the box. You can't put it outside the box. So you have to take away things in the box in order to put other things inside of it. You have to take it away. So yeah, there's priorities because if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so when you have a budget, you have to take things away. Now, those things can be taken away in an adaptive dynamic nature. That's what agility is all about. But the funding and the budget and the way it's done is you must execute. No, you need to do things like the commercial world does. So I've introduced a quarterly cadence on which if I don't see results, I change what's in the box. You're not allowed to do that in the federal government. That's ridiculous. You should be. And that's where leadership needs to have the courage to say, we're not doing this right. These 3 and 5 year plans are ludicrous and ridiculous. If you hit a 5-year plan and you execute on it, you're lucky. You guessed right. Who in their right mind thinks technology is 3 years in the future? Let's stop kidding ourselves and let's start being honest. This is ridiculous. You're asking me to do something that is impossible to do. Why is it so hard for people to stick up and say it? I just don't get it. And it does start at Congress. Sorry, this CR stuff is wasting so much taxpayer money. It's my money. I really can't believe how poorly the United States is running because Congress doesn't do their job.
Okay. Yeah. I realize I have this timer. I thought it was a great idea, except that I don't listen to it. We're running a little over time, but I wanted everybody at least have a chance. Maybe 30 seconds or so, something that you can emphasize or something we didn't talk about. You can go a minute. I don't care. Go ahead, Amy.
Well, I just want to appreciate Jamie's passion to kind of address, and I think it's really important, is it has to be risk-based. You have to know the missions when you're in IT and cyber, and then you have to base everything on like, what is the true risk? And then be able to have the hard conversations with the mission leaders, with your boss, and say, you know what, we're not going to be in compliance. We're not going to get an A on our FITARA scorecard, but I'm basing the limited resources I have against the risk. And being able to have that conversation and have leadership that will support you in that is one of the most important things you can do, because to just sit there and say, well, here's the 3 checklists and this is what we're going to do is not working. You absolutely have to be able to go in and say, you know, these are the crown jewels, and you have to have that level of fidelity and be brave. It's a very scary conversation to say, hey, and guess what? We're getting a D-, but that makes us better than DOD, right? So that is you know, that is the goal, right? But at the same time, what I do think is my counterparts in DOD are doing a great job of basing things off risk and mission. And that's really, you know, what we have to do every day.
Lisa?
One of the benefits of the EO was that it's shy. It really kind of brought a bright light, shone a bright light on where we're failing across the board when it comes to securing our systems, our information, our data, whatever that might be. What you're seeing, and what I think is important, is collective action. You're not just seeing one agency that's tackling it, you're seeing the entire enterprise looking at it. You're seeing both from the civilian side, the DoD side, you're seeing industry stepping up, you're seeing state and local take action. Cyber's all of us, regardless of your title and your role. We're not going to solve this and get out of this by hiring and recruiting more people. We're going to solve this and get out of this by collective efforts across the board.
Great. Kimberly?
I mean, building off of that, I think there is a temptation, especially in government, to kind of jealously guard our silos. And so just building off of that partnerships is understanding that we all have to cede a little ground and we all have to change the way we think about things. There's a natural territorialness that is just unsustainable when we are trying to move efforts across the board. And so that is something that we continuously face, and a request I'd make to all, federal partners in this room is that, put that aside, put the temptation to kind of firewall off your special snowflake mission, to think about kind of broadly what is sustainable and what looks like sustainability in the future across the federal government, so that we can all be achieving outcomes and not just kind of segmenting off pieces that are succeeding based entirely on their budget or their own individual leader success, but rather kind of collectively across the board.
Thanks. Drew?
First of all, I love this guy, right? So I got to be on more panels with him. We're getting a beer.
We can arrange that.
So I would echo, what's been said about kind of the territorial nature of this whole thing. It is an issue. We continue to fight it, but that's definitely something from a government personnel perspective. We all need to be more collaboration minded and not territorial in what we're doing. And then from an industry perspective, I'll just foot stomp again, the interoperability piece, right? And how can we get it to where industry helps with that, and we don't have to do a lot of government-owned solutions that are glue code for industry solutions. We've been down that road many times before. It does not work well. So the interoperability piece is going to be key.
Jamie?
I love it. So, team sport. You got to collaborate, got to be transparent. Oh my gosh, how about that? Anyway, so mission, DISA, interoperability. I hear it, interoperability. What am I doing? Mission. I award patents and I register trademarks. That's it. I shouldn't sub-optimize on the best procurement staff in the world. Just like I shouldn't optimize that I'm the best cyber in the world. Now, do I have a big, strong mission to collect cyber? I got to be secure, but not to the detriment of all my other functions. So whatever you're doing in cybersecurity, it's not just cybersecurity, it's incrementally maturing. And that's why I think the executive order is really good, because you're trying to assess your maturity and then grow along all 5 pillars, not just one. Oh, I'm the best at this. Yeah, so what? How about your device? How about your data? You know, what application code sign, et cetera, et cetera. It's a team sport. Don't sub-optimize on just cyber. Get your mission done. And vote today, please.
Ryan?
I'm not running.
Again. So, fully agree across the collaboration and team sport. I'd again come back to what Lisa talked about, those sort of sons and daughters of the EO, which are really the key to its ultimate effectiveness. The implementation downstream of things like, yes, we've started to define what zero trust truly is and operationalize it, but now we're analyzing that for a maturity model of zero trust implementation on a department and agency level. It's those, again, sons and daughters, the implementation streams that are ultimately going to determine the effectiveness, not EO as a document itself, but what it breeds for outcomes.
Great. Well, thanks again to the panel. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time. Thank you. We're going to take our break now. When the bell goes off, try to make your way back. I know we haven't talked very much in 3 years, but we need to continue with the program. Plus, I went too long. Okay, hardest part of my job. You need to get back in your seats and stop talking, which is not a very, I like talking, and it's hard to do that. If everybody could get in their seats, let's close the doors. We'll get this going. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Everybody got their coffee? We're ready to go? Okay, our next speaker is somebody we worked with a few times, and I don't usually. We have a lot of companies in lots of spaces, but Sonotype has been a real special company for us because they, along with Mark Schwartz, who's the CIO of USCIS, they got me in this DevSecOps space. I didn't even know if I wanted to do it. This is a few years ago, and they were like, you got to do it. You got to do it. So it was with Derek Weeks, who's no longer with the company, but April's been with the company for a while now, Mike. But they've been a great partner. So we're going to learn a little bit more. This has been a very big point of emphasis for us is around the software supply chain. It's starting to be a big deal, and we're hearing it across the DoD and civilian space. So I'd like to introduce Mike Donovan to the stage. Thank you, Mike.
Good morning. As Tom mentioned, we've been big in the DevSecOps space for quite some time. And so as the executive order came out, we have been very much aligned with it. The SBOMs, software bill of material, and managing the software supply chain are terminologies that are relatively new to the federal government. But we've been managing that way for 10 years. So as we look at the executive order, Section 4 is what we really focus in on for managing the open source. And that's the management of the software supply chain, the SBOMs, and we'll talk a little bit more about the SBOMs and what those mean. What our biggest concern is that people are going to collect SBOMs and check the box that they got one and file it away. We see it as a dynamic document that you'll be able to use on an ongoing basis. And so that's kind of what we're going to focus in on. And part of how the EO is evolving is all sorts of standards and regulations coming out to clear up what is meant by the EO, establish deadlines for compliance, and things along those lines. A bunch of them on the slide there. I'm not going to read them all. A couple of foreign governments involved on the bottom line there as well. But lots of ranging from guidance to mandatory compliance type items. One of those M2209, that one is around the zero trust side. And we do play in that area a little bit as well. We take the position that you cannot achieve zero trust until you have your software supply chain under control, because you could have, even though you trust every person you let in, you may still have bad software in there if you're not securing the software supply chain. M2218 came out, I guess it's coming up on about 2 months now. That covers the software supply chain, specifically invoking compliance with the NIST 800-218 framework. And diving in a little bit more on those, the M2218 will require any of us who are providing software to the government to do a self-attestation that we are complying with that NIST publication. So that's something all of the software providers need to be looking at their software development methodologies, making sure that they are complying with that publication out there. That has a deadline of September 30th for most software providers and June 30th for critical software providers. It isn't super clear who decides if my software is critical. There is a definition in there, but I think it's decided by each agency. So if one of the agencies using my software says this is critical, then my deadline's been moved up to June 30th. So this is something we all need to be assessing, making sure we're doing the right things to comply with. And SBOMs may be required for software provided to the government. Again, that's decided by the agency which software they need SBOMs for. But the feedback that we're getting seems to be that most of them are just going to say, we want SBOMs for everything, rather than trying to study each software package and decide if it needs one or not. The SBOM goes beyond just having a list of what the components are in your system. It also needs a remediation process. So when a supplier provides you with an SBOM, what you want to be able to do is understand what's in there, information about all of the components. Ours is focused, of course, on the open source components that are coming in to your environment. It does identify vulnerabilities, but remember that that's a snapshot in time. So at the time they delivered the software, they created the SBOM, and at that moment, Log4j was perfectly fine. A few weeks later, Log4j has gone bad, but if you're not monitoring your SBOMs, you may not realize that. So that becomes very critical. And we mentioned Log4j because it's coming up on its birthday, about 1 more month of when that was discovered. And as of today, the last 24 hours, over 33% of the downloads of Log4j have been the old vulnerable versions. Sonatype is the keepers, the maintainers of Maven Central, the open source repository for all of the Java components out there. So we're able to see the statistics of, what's being downloaded. And so it is still a problem that too many people are not aware of. So what the SBOMs provide, the visibility, the security, management of legal risk, license information as well. So what we want to focus on is what you can do with those. And why do we want to focus on that? And why Sonatype? Your applications today tend to be 80 to 90% open source libraries, 10 to 20% custom code. So with that massive quantity of open source out there, you've got a huge risk exposure surface if you're not identifying and managing these things carefully. And when you look at SBOMs, they tend to tell you vulnerability CVE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exists. We have a large data research team that goes in and researches every one of these to give you guidance on what you can do about it, whether there is an upgraded version that fixes the problem or workarounds to make yourself less vulnerable and the like. So the differentiators for us, first off, we've been treating the software supply chain approach and the use of SBOMs for about a decade now. So we didn't just jump on the bandwagon when the executive order suddenly required them. I mean, we celebrated when that came out because it aligns perfectly with what we've been doing. We've got the world-class research teams, most accurate results, and again, the detailed research beyond each vulnerability. One of the things that we do that will highlight some of our research capability is a state of the software supply chain report. Our 8th annual one just came out a couple weeks ago. At our booth over there, we've got a one-pager about it with the link to get in and download it and understand, and a couple of the stats from it that tell you why being concerned about the open source matters. 740% increase in software supply chain attacks over the past 3 years. So it's bad and it's getting worse. So you need to have that awareness and monitoring that you don't get caught by that. And how many people are not doing the monitoring? 1.2 billion vulnerable components are downloaded every month. The total downloads per year of open source components is well over 1 trillion components a year now. But 1.2 billion per month that are being downloaded. And 96% of the vulnerable downloads, there is a fixed version available. So people just aren't paying attention. They downloaded something months or years ago, it works, they keep using it, and they're not identifying the fact that it's gone bad. Going back to the EO, things about the secure software development environment, the software bill of materials, we've boiled those down into a whole big long list of requirements that you need to meet to be in compliance with the executive order. And all of the ones on this page are all of the ones that we can help you to do with our integrated platform. We've got more details on this again at our booth for the next break. Please stop by and ask. We share lots of information on it with you. We have our integrated platform that supports this. At the heart of it is called Nexus Repository Manager. This is where you can store your open source components. We're also looking at solutions where people may use that to store the self-attestations and the SBOMs that they receive. We protect your repository with Nexus Firewall. So when you're bringing components in from the outside world, Firewall checks them against your policies, decides whether to let them in or not. And then Nexus Lifecycle, we see every step of the way. from the developer's workstation to builds, to deployment, to continuous monitoring. That will scan your applications at build time, generate an SBOM for you. And then we continuously monitor that SBOM in case some of those components go bad. We can also ingest SBOMs. So as you're receiving SBOMs from your other software suppliers, don't just file them away. Scan them with lifecycle, enable continuous monitoring on them. The default is once a day. So you'll come in the morning and have a notification that says a new problem came out. This week was OpenSSL, the one that's infamous from Heartbleed years ago, had new vulnerabilities this week. Our customers came in, first day it was out, they've got a notification. OpenSSL has a new critical vulnerability, and here's where you've used it. So that type of information can keep you ahead of the curve with all of these attacks out there. That you can very quickly find them. With Log4j, we had a banking customer who told us he has 1,700 applications, and without our tool, he would have had to send 1,700 surveys to the different application owners to confirm if they dealt with Log4j. With our tools, a couple clicks of a button, he had an inventory of which applications were using it, and they had it remedied within a week. Other customers 3 months in were still all hands on deck combing through their releases to look for it to see if they even had it. So that's the story. Again, open source is a critical part of complying with the executive order, and we're happy to talk with you about how we can help. As I said, an integrated solution that does pretty much all you need for the management of the open source in your environments.
That's fantastic. I have a question. Hang on for the applause. I got one question. So there was a government agency, it's in the news a couple months ago, that had a major, they took some code and published it. How do you prevent those kinds of things? Is that something you all deal with? I mean, how do you prevent these mistakes that keep happening?
Part of preventing those mistakes is establishing that secure software supply chain, managing things, bringing on your zero trust to make sure that things aren't mistakenly getting published somewhere. Yeah. We primarily help on preventing the bad from coming into your environment, but then we can continuously monitor that. And one of the ways that the bad info is getting out is from malicious open source code. You put it in, you think it's calculating due dates for invoices, but it's actually mining your data and shipping it out somewhere. So detecting those components and blocking them from ever entering your system is where we play a big part in that. But at the runtime end of monitoring what's going on and data going out, that's not our swim lane, but that's important as well. Great.
Thank you, Mike. That was very informative. Appreciate it. Next, we have Jason Miller with Fed News Network and hopefully some trivia. I mean, I always look forward to the trivia. I almost quoted your trivia earlier, 7%. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Yeah, while you get your notes out. So we were talking this morning on our panel, and we need to hire younger people and all that kind of stuff. How much of the federal workforce is under 30? Any guesses? 5? It's close, 7%. So can you imagine that the federal government, and I saw another stat, the average age of a federal employee is 52. So we actually may be headed toward, when these retirements are coming. We've been talking about that for 20 years. Are you ready to retire, Tom? No. Who's ready to retire? Thank you. Lisa. All right. Am I taking your microphone? You get my microphone.
Tom learned not to share his microphone, yet the first thing he did on that question is you gave up your microphone, Tom. All right. Oh, you're like, all right, where's my panelists? Elisa, Miguel, Shane, Ben, come on upstairs or on the stage at least. Upstairs. I know. It's like 2 stairs. It's like up the stairs. All right. I was told, Tom, there's a clock on the thing now. Is that because of you? Okay, just making sure. All right. While everyone gets settled in, first of all, always a pleasure to be here at ATARC. Thanks to Tom, of course, and Kim Eastridge and all the folks at ATARC for inviting me. I do enjoy moderating these panels. They're always a good time. And Tom, I appreciate the fact there's only 4 people on the panel instead of 12, like normal. So thank you for that. As you heard, I'm Jason Miller from Federal News Network. You can find us on federalnewsnetwork.com, of course, and of course on your AM radio button. It does work 1500 AM. I promise you, if you are driving home today and you hit it, it will go to AM. I can promise you that. So if you've seen me moderate before, I like to start with a little bit of trivia, as Tom said, because I like audience participation. One thing I like about panels is I've asked the panels to keep it fairly short, and then we get to audience questions. Because of course, this is about you, not me. I can ask questions all day. The goal is for you to ask questions and learn something. So a little bit of audio, a little bit of trivia to get you warmed up. I have some, I don't know about new trivia questions, but different ones since Tom ruined the one that I was not going to use anyways. But here we go. So remember, it's audience participation. I'll remind everybody. So one key feature of Zero Trust, of course, that's what we're talking about today, is this idea of continuous monitoring. So this past August, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of which key federal cybersecurity program? Shane, you can't talk. 10th anniversary, just call it out. Yay, CDM, very good. Now, CDM, if you remember this, back in 2012, got going, but they made the award in August of 2013, 17 companies, $6 billion contract. It's been changed up. I found some interesting research from our friends at DHS. And since 2012, DHS has received $2.36 billion specifically for CDM. Of course, a big chunk of that came as well from the American Rescue Fund Act. Of that $650 million that CISA got, a big chunk of that, I'm not sure how much, actually went to CDM. And CDM and CISA plans another $4 billion through 2033. So something to look forward to there. All right, next one. All right, new data from OMB just came out. And this data is about the number of cyber incidents agencies faced in fiscal 2021. I'll give you the hint. This comes from the annual FISMA report to Congress. How many cyber incidents did agencies face in 2021? Give me a number. No, whoever said nothing. Say it again. 1,600, you're very kind. It's way too low.
Very kind.
20 what? Too close, but still too low. One more. 30,000. All right. 32,543, 6% more than 2020. Now, what's interesting about this, only 7 of those 32,000 were considered by OMB's definition of a major cyber incident, and most of them were related to the SolarWinds attack. All right, last one. You guys are kind of warming up a little bit. I see it. We're going to talk about the cyber EO, right? It required OMB to issue how many memos / guidances or documents, and extra credit if you can actually name which one. How many? It's a number. 32,000. Thank you. No, much lower. OMB would still be issuing them. Any guesses? 8, too high. 5. Who said that? There you go. 5 memos. Can you name them? No, can you name the 5 memos? You can name yourself. I hope so. All right, here we go. There's the most recent one on software security. We know that one. You had log management, critical software, endpoint detection and response, and just the overall ZTA memo. All right, so what's that mean? You have a little bit of discussion for tonight with friends and family at dinner. You can wow them with cybersecurity trivia. So how we're going to do our panel today. I've asked each of the panelists to take about 3 to 5 minutes, maybe less, to tell you something you don't know about what they're doing around cybersecurity and ZTA. I don't do bios. I don't do introductions. If you don't know who Shane Barney is, look him up. He's on the LinkedIn. If you don't know what the Millennium Challenge Corporation does, look that up. It's on the Google, I promise you. And then we will get to your questions. I took Tom's wireless mic. I will be walking around. So please participate. That all being said, we are unrehearsed. We are unplanned. So Shane, lead us off.
5 minutes?
3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5.
That's like a breath.
Hello, my name is Shane Barney. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for USCIS.
I said no bios.
That's as much as I'm giving. That's it. I'm done. No. So what we have done lately, so CIS cloud heavy, 95% of my enterprise is cloud. We have been involved in cloud for 10 years, 12 years, something like that, long time. First federal agency to do that, first federal agency to DevOps. And so as we've evolved and changed and made a lot of mistakes, we've also, matured our organization and things. So we started into this so-called thing zero trust quite a while ago. And so most recently what we're doing is really expanding our portfolio and how we do automation across all 5 pillars. We were doing it previously, but now we define it by pillars, even if they're silly. And we can talk about that, right? And so really the big push right now is to how we do that automation, how we integrate the SOC and actually other teams within that automation portfolio. And it's much bigger and more expansive than just the SOC. I've always been a fan. Security programs are a security program. Therefore, when you talk about automation, you should talk about your security automation, which involves your entire security program. So it should be your risk, your governance, how you do documentation, all of that. So the big push right now is for us to leverage some of these newer frameworks that have come out that are allowing us to do, like, for example, automation of all of our documentation. I find it ridiculous that we do PDF files for security plans. I find absolutely no value in that. So we're automating that. We're automating the way that the dev teams communicate and how that communication then translates into documentation for our security plans or for updates to how we do things. So it's a big challenge. It's a big undertaking. When I first started proposing it, my teams thought I was absolutely insane, which I probably sort of am. But the reality is that in the modern cyber world, you heard how many incidences were faced. I know how many my agency has faced in this last year, and I know how some of them are really significant. And matter of fact, nobody's taking time off in December. December is officially ruled as everybody comes to work because something bad's going to happen. And it's the new world that we live in. So we have to get to the point where threat focused is where you're doing threat hunting as a continual process of your cybersecurity program. We can no longer just rely on a checkbox. Checkbox security is just, it should have died a long time ago. It's still around, it's still with us, but we're trying to kill it off as quickly as possible. Okay, that was bad.
That was good. That was good. All right. Quick follow-up for you, of course, is when we talk about automation, does it change the business process? Because again, it's that old, are you just automating bad processes, or are you also improving the process itself to say, what data are we pulling? How's that data useful and the like?
No, that's a great question. And there's 2 different ways we approach automation. Sometimes we're automating things that have never been done. There's really no business practice wrapped around it because it's either new or different or somehow we're changing up things. So it makes it actually a little easier. When we're faced with existing business processes, we'll often model the existing business process with the automation. Lots of reasons for doing it that way. We've done it a couple different ways, but what we found by modeling the existing business process, one, it kind of helps us find and figure out what exactly it is we're after. It's not, when you talk about efficiency, it's not the most efficient way by any stretches of the imagination, but we sort of iterate towards perfection, which of course we've never achieved, but there's a theory behind that. And so really it's once we get the business process down, then we can start looking at it and going holistically and saying, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore. We are doing this based on outdated technology or outdated, policy. We can remove that, or we can streamline this. And we find that process, it's not quite as efficient necessarily, but it actually is very effective. And it helps us find things that we maybe we weren't even aware of that we were doing or should be doing. So it's sort of a split of both.
All right. Thank you, Shane. Miguel from the Millennium Challenge Corporation.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you, ATARC, for inviting me and for allowing me to share my thoughts.
And he used to work with CIS.
Yeah, we worked together. Yeah. So I hope I'm not too disappointed in my response, but what we're doing and what I'm taking advantage of is teaching, collaborating, and moving forward with an education program to the agency. And that's and the reason I'm doing this is I want a value proposition. We talked a little bit about earlier, the moderators talked about collaborating and how this is for the customer. And this is exactly, if I don't get the customers on board, if I don't get their understanding the program is going to be difficult to implement. And so I'm taking time to go out to departments and divisions, teaching them the vernacular, teaching them what zero trust is, why we need to do this, and the benefits, I hope, the value proposition of what it could translate to them. We travel a lot in the agency, and we've been, our endpoints have been hardened for some time now. But our infrastructure now, the castle moat, everything, we're a young agency compared to most other, we're 20 years, we're going to celebrate 20 years soon. We're not there yet. And most everything we have is in the cloud. So that's what we're doing. I'm also taking time to within the office of CIO, teach and collaborate with our business partners in there. For example, our infrastructure team, our development team. And so that we could all understand the same language of what zero trust is. It's a new, I take it as a new endeavor for the agency. And I hate to date myself. I remember putting out my first LAN, and it was a difficult challenge back then for the business process. If we don't do this with our customers, they're gonna probably have a little, reluctance and they'll find other ways to do things that they find easier. So that's what we're doing.
All right, I have a quick follow-up. I was moderated a different panel. I do other panels. And one of the things that we expected to talk all about, well, where are you with your zero trust journey and why zero trust is important? How are you dealing with microsegmentation and all these fun things? And the discussion ended up really all about the user experience. And everybody on the panel, is both industry and government, were saying, you got to get that right. If you don't get the user experience right, what's the point? Is that really what's behind your education a little bit? And maybe how are you ensuring that user experience is right?
Sure. That's a great question. So zero trust is it's a change. It's a change from implicit to explicit access control. And so we all know this, but to do that, so our data is now released to an individual with certain, at the time of day, the activity-based access control. They may, we have implicit zones that we're going to implement, and the users need to understand that they're not going to have access to everything at one time. And if that's going to be a big change, guys. I mean, that for me, my agency, we implement access control from the user level. Somebody will go in there and they'll do the SharePoint permissions and everything else. But it goes beyond that. And so data categorization for us is really starting out, and we want the metadata behind that so that this process is automated and we're going to, there's going to be some pain in there because we're not going to get the policy right the first time. And so if the users don't understand why we're doing this and how we're moving this forward, then I think we're going to have we're setting ourselves up for failure. So yeah, exactly.
All right. Now, Alyssa says from TTS, but she has a surprise for us.
Yeah. Well, one of the first surprises, it's Elisa.
Oh, jeez. I have been trying
It's Elisa.
Elisa.
Yeah.
It's you know
It's a bit. It's okay.
Elisa.
Yeah, so I am permanently at the Technology Transformation Services at GSA, but I am detailed to the Office of Government-Wide Policy with emerging technology. So we're trying to take painful activity that involves policy and trying to make it less painful. So I'm studying, or not studying, but trying to see what is out there related to zero trust pillars. We all hate that word. I'm glad you were brave enough to admit it for all of us. So that is such as identity authentication alternatives. So really harping on the OMB memo that mentioned the phishing resistant MFA. So getting to that next, I hate saying it, next gen of like beyond that PIN and
what comes after that and seeing what is out there for emerging technology, things like continuous authentication and, are we going to be identified using our keystrokes and wearables and things like that? So it's a really exciting landscape of what's out there. Also, it touches upon software bill of materials with open source software and how that affects the supply chain risk management aspects. So looking into the critical technology aspects into that and how we're making sure that whatever we're developing is done in a secure manner. But I want to pause there because I did listen to the last panel and I just want to mention that I have been a federal employee for 15 years and I am 35 years old. So I came in as a GS3 and I came in through what is now the Pathways program. It was then Student Temporary Experience Program. I converted to a Student Career Experience Program, went through a career ladder. I am now currently a GS15. I purposefully work at the Technology Transformation Service, somewhere where we have the digital core service, where we have a way for new entry-level people to come into the federal service. So I think there is a space and a willingness for young entrepreneurs to come into the government and be entrepreneurs and share their desire to support the American people and doing tech and innovation.
There's absolutely a way, and there's a good way. But I have a question on something else.
Yeah.
Of course. So when you talk about looking at the emerging landscape, and I think identity and access management gets a lot of attention when it comes to zero trust. What you are doing through OGP Emerging Technologies is saying, okay, today we have the PIV card. Today we have derived credentials.
Yep.
We have other. Are you looking at, okay, what's coming up in 3, 5, 7 years?
Exactly. It's a little bit of both of what are agencies wanting to do today that they're currently being blocked by existing policy that we can make recommendations to either OMB, NIST, et cetera, federal agencies that they would need to change so that they unblock. So the forward-thinking agencies that want to do things tomorrow can do their tomorrow things, and also taking a look to what this means for a foothold for 5 to 10 years.
And we know from the last administration, they unblocked a lot of those old policies, the 1999, we must do this way policy. Are there, again, without maybe revealing too much, because you probably will say it's pre-decisional, I can't talk about it. Are there some policies that are standing out to you to go, yes, we will be making some recommendations, hopefully, or give some ideas to our friends at OMB to rethink things? Is there anything that broadly you can, I know you haven't been there very long, but.
I haven't, but that is one of those activities that our office is actively engaged in previously. And I think it's a continuous activity that our agency looks to do, or our office looks to do.
So basically she's saying, if you have suggestions.
Yes. Please.
All right, Ben, take us home. Ben's from Benify. Respond a little bit to what you heard from the folks on the panel, but also what you're seeing with your federal clients.
Sure. So at Benify, what we're seeing throughout all public sector is this kind of change between classic architecture, which is what was rolled out, and this cloud native, this modern architecture. And so what we first used to hear, I would do panels like this years ago, we would say, trust, but what's the word? Verify. That's what we always used to say. Now we're saying deny, but identify, right? So it's about your identification. So we're seeing that in the world, and that identification comes from the user side as well as the machines. So there's kind of four principles that we are looking around that. So it's the NI piece. One is the context. You got to have context of now from the zero trust world. So I live in Virginia. I normally log into Venafi. If they see me coming from Virginia, that's fine. All of a sudden, if you see me coming from Russia, that's context, right? What you have to have that context in this zero trust world that we live in. And the next piece is just granularity. So now with cloud natives, you've got microservices, you've got mesh, you are now out there, and all of these things have identities. What we heard from the panel here, what we heard in the past panel is your resources, your people are not increasing. You know what's increasing? Machines, IoT devices, right? Those applications, the people are spinning things up and then taking them down in a day. All of those things have identity, and you have to have trust around that. And then the last piece is just being dynamic. You've got to dynamically just be able to, as things spin up and down, actually get your arms around that. So when we talk about the machine identity piece, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it is a struggle, right? We all heard Jamie say, hey, the castle's gone, the moat area, the perimeter's gone, and now within zero trust, it's a good strategy to start, but it's a strategy, right? The interoperability that folks were talking about, that ecosystem, the integration, they all have to work together.
All right, we're gonna get to your questions, so please think of them, but I'm gonna give Ben the one logical follow-up that I have. I love this idea as you talk about machines and identity. So when we think about machines, I remember several years ago when NASA, for an example, was getting into RPA, and they were doing a lot of, well, does this bot need a PIV card? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And then I know GSA has done a lot with bots, and they maybe took a bit of a different approach. And then finally OMB came out with a memo that said, yes, but you can kind of make a risk-based decision. So I know you're not necessarily talking about just RPA, but machine identity is a huge deal. Maybe talk a little bit about how you all think about that security side of it.
Yeah, so I mean, like you just said, from a machine perspective, those can be applications. We're seeing it all the time. I've got a customer where they were utilizing different machines. It was a robot and did not understand that there's a machine identity tied to it. I mean, I recently was in a conversation and their whole plant stopped because the machine identities expired. And that was millions of dollars. And they didn't even realize they had those machine identities because we're now moving so quickly. And it was a group that purchased that. So they're everywhere and they're exponentially growing. And you have to have a good programmer around your machine identity management.
All right. I'll open up to the panel. Machine identities. I think Shane probably has something to say.
Yeah, I think that you're not wrong. I mean, we have 25,000 users, I think, growing every day. And so there tends to be this focus on users, like that's the only problem. I have 150,000 endpoints, which is the bigger problem. It's the endpoints. The endpoints are far more difficult, and we've never really applied structured identity to them. And so to do that at scale, and especially at speed, when you're talking cloud environments, you're going to have to automate that. So having cert automation is like a forefront building block to all things that you do in this space. And it's also the thing that most organizations lack. They don't even think about it until everything goes dark one day and they're like, well, what's going on?
Exactly.
You know, and you're not automating just the assert piece of it. You have to automate all the roles, because each one of those things is going to have a role. It's going to have some function in your organization. And when it starts going awry, it's doing something that's role is outside of that. Well, now you have a different problem, because the entire intent of zero trust, stick with that term, the entire intent of zero trust is not to find the huge outliers outside the bell curve. It's to find these little tiny little bumps on the bell curve itself, and you only find those in the details. If you look at SolarWinds is the best example of that. You know, threat actors spent months and months and months on individual organizational networks, just quietly creeping around, living inside that bell curve. and did an unfreaking unbelievably great job at it. And the entire intent of what you do in the zero trust architecture is to identify those small, little, tiny, minute changes, things that are so small that the human eye is never going to catch them. And this is where your automation becomes your friend.
Miguel or Elisa, anyone? I can go to audience questions. Who has one? Here we go. You always kind of break. So with Tom, I'm holding the microphone because Tom hasn't learned his lesson.
So Eric Florence, Veracode, question about the way you guys are dealing with zero trust. A lot of times I hear people talk about, hey, we got, identity, we got machines, we got all this stuff. But then you talk about collaboration, being able to work with other silos. How is your zero trust taking in all the pillars? And how are you managing, the application layer, the data, in addition to identity and network?
So sure, how zero trust is taking in all the pillars. And so I don't have a good answer for you other than to say we're I don't want to boil the ocean, to be honest with you. We're a young agency. We're looking at right now the identity pillar, device pillar, and data pillar. The DevOps, the application workload, those are for us a little bit harder. We don't have a lot of development, unlike some other agencies that have big development. We have a little bit of it. So we're prioritizing that. Our user community, our customers, they travel with their endpoints. And so devices are very important. Identity access, very important. And the data is very important. So that's how I'm dealing with it. I'm prioritizing, taking the pillars that I know are most important to us at the moment.
So we have a slightly different, the way we're approaching is slightly different. One, we started down the zero trust pathway not a year ago. We started down in 2018. And we called it this really crazy term called cyber hygiene. I'm sure some of you may have heard it. It's actually all zero trust is. But that being aside, we started focusing in first on solving some of the basic building blocks, things that we needed, whether it was cert automation, API security. We established a centralized role-based access program. We had single sign-on across the agency into all of our applications. We did all the basics. And so jump forward to when the EO actually came out and they said, oh, hey, this is really important now. We were already kind of pretty far down that path. Now, I will tell you that identity and even the networking pieces are probably the easiest part of the entire gig. The 85% lift, the hardest part is applications and data. And doing data in stream and in flight, unreal difficult. We are, as an agency, we are a huge data collector, as you can well imagine. I forget how many millions of new records we create every year. It's astronomical. And not to mention all of our paper files that we're digitizing, and that's good fun too. And so you factor in all that data that has to be protected, and it goes far beyond just the data in and of itself, because you've got to identify the subtypes of data and when collections of data become sensitive versus non-sensitive, and how that transitions, and the laws that govern that are just mind-boggling. So all that being rolled into one, getting your hands wrapped around is very difficult. So it is a huge team effort. It involves so much more than just me. I happen to run it. I happen to spearhead it from my agency, but it involves CDO. It involves all of our engineering groups, all of our dev groups. It involves all of the business functions, because at the end of the day, whether I like it or not, and I've heard the statement before, oh yeah, if you do zero trust right, it won't affect the end users. No, that's wrong. If you're smart, if you're good at it, you'll use what one of my employees call smart friction, a term I totally love. Because the idea is do you apply friction where it makes the most sense? Does that mean you're going to get it right? No, you're going to mess it up more times than you kind of care to remember. But I think that goes back to some of the points I've made here, where the customer engagement, getting with your end users and having them understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, is really critical. I don't know how you're going to do without it. We're just starting a roadshow where I am literally going around my agency. We're going to have offices in every country in the nation, and then several places all around the world, where we're going to start communicating literally directly with each of our end users, explaining why we're doing this, and tying the security side of it to the realities of what they're going to be faced with. It's a nightmare, in a word.
It's a good nightmare.
It is. It's a fun nightmare. As a CISO, absolutely. It is the funnest nightmare I've ever wanted to go take on. You know, but at the same time, I have this philosophy that security at the end of the day has to be a mission enabler. And if you become the no shop or the place where all things go to die, you're not enabling the mission. The mission's just going to find a way to get done around you. And so you got to work hand in hand with the mission side and the business side to help them understand what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and sometimes make compromises on that. We do it all the time. It's a dance, it's a waltz.
Yeah, so I would say from a Venafi perspective, we've got a full-on pillar diagram that goes into what we address. As he just said, and what you've heard from other folks in the panel, there's no silver bullet, right, of all of these pillars. From a Venafi perspective, we've got a machine identity management fund where we fund every year $12 million to integrate with our ecosystem partners, because there is no silver bullet, right? It is a partnership with the federal government, the partners that are here to definitely solidify the organizations and make us better from a vendor perspective and protect the nation.
From an emerging technology perspective, and if you want to put your other hat on a little bit on TTS, what are the questions you get about when you talk about the different parts of zero trust that are, hey, how do we do this? How we need help with this? Is there anything that stands out to you that you're like, because identity is something the government's been working on since HSP 12, 2004, not perfectly.
And ignored properly.
Right.
Yeah, ignored properly.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like the friction line. It's
Smart friction.
Smart friction. And one of the things we were saying, progress, not perfection. And I like to say, like, freaking first times, like, you're not going to get it right the first time. And it's the identity piece is definitely like there, but like, it really, me personally, I always go back to the risk management framework. Like, I'm a huge purist when it comes to that. It's a little like not popular, but like map the NIST controls for like zero trust to the RMF, and you'll have a good like baseline of like what to prioritize and start there. Like, you're gonna have some controls that are gonna be non-compliant. Maybe the ones that are related to zero trust, like, you prioritize those instead. And make sure you're categorizing your system appropriately. Like, I think a lot of times folks like to do the cart before the horse and miscategorize their systems because they're afraid that it's going to mean more controls than they would like, not realizing that they can tailor, or it's not a checklist based and they can accept risk, or, you know, that CISO's offices really are no longer the no shop because it's not compliance based anymore. They are accepting risks. And so there is a difference between categorizing and risk acceptance. So that's what we try to instill and get the message across whenever we have the chance.
All right, another question. In the back. I'll hold the mic. You tell them who you are, though.
Good morning, Linwood Jolly, Hacker One. Elisa, I know you're very involved in bug bounty programs, and I'd really like to get your opinion on how innovative are they, and where do they fit in your whole zero trust architecture?
Yeah, so I think bug bounty programs are a great tool to use to incentivize when programs have, as a part of their risk management process, especially when we're talking about software development and you're rolling out new features and that you might be taking a little more risk. One of the things that's really important when thinking about bug internet accessible web applications is the bugs are already out there. So what you're doing when you're having a vulnerability disclosure program and potentially adding a bounty onto it with a bug bounty is that you're incentivizing to have those security researchers tell you about what they've found instead of telling their other security researcher friends that might use that information maliciously. So but you have to make those incentives the right incentives, and they have to be commensurate with the systems that are out there. So I think they're a really useful tool when used appropriately and as a risk mitigation activity.
Yeah, I'd just like to piggyback. We've used the CDM BDP platform. It's been for our agency, it's been wonderful. It's I can't remember how many vulnerabilities we've closed on that. But it's been very, the process is very clean, not a difficult process for us to follow, and it's brought in, I think, a more secure system, because we've got the researchers taking a look at it and say, hey, this needs to be this SQL injection, vulnerability, take a look at it.
Another question? All right, two things. Matthew, hey, good to see you again.
Matthew Shepherd, HHS. I just want to second, HHS has been running a closed bug bounty for probably 5 years now. It's been a huge tool for helping us reduce risk. So if you want to talk about it, happy to hear talk about it. But I did want to ask more directly on how you see us testing which controls are actually and getting some real data on getting controls that are working. How do we know they're working? How are you approaching that process? Because I hear a lot of, we're going to get it wrong. And I know that's true. But if you come into a building where they're doing engineering, they always have this stack of things that you're supposed to do, and it's well documented. We don't have that as a cybersecurity engineer. So we're left sort of guessing at some level and collaborating. But getting real stats, getting real information on what's working, that's what I'm hoping we get to some level. Love your comments on that.
I'll take that
So it's
one.
like measuring success.
What's effective in each of those things. So we're going to spend money on things, and some of them are going to be really effective.
Spend a
some
lot
of
of
them
money,
aren't.
actually.
So knowing which ones are good is really what I'm.
Yeah, so there's a couple different approaches, and we've toyed with this for a while. When we started into the cloud, we started doing agile. The security program wasn't up to the task, wasn't even in the ballpark. They could barely spell cloud. And in fact, at the time, there was this statement I used to hear all the time: "Oh, cloud is nothing more than a data center in the sky." No, it is not. It is certainly not. It is so not that. I can't even stress how little it is not that. There are advantages to cloud. I don't know if there's any advantages to data centers, but there are advantages to cloud that from a security perspective that I just love and have come to love and come to appreciate. In terms of answering your question directly, the way we begin, we had a very similar problem. We weren't sure when we were being effective. It's a governmental kind of question to ask. So it's, you're from the government when you ask something like that. But at the same time, it's an important one because when you look at the controls, what are controls? Controls are just known risk. There are things we absolutely know are a risk for one reason or another. These are at risk that because of some previous incident or just because someone really smart thought it up, but they are known risks. And if you know that they're known risks, then you should be able to deal with them. So the approach that we took is we began to own the lower environments. And then providing all of our development, and bear in mind, my agency is a heavy dev shop. I've got like 3,000 developers running around. We do development like you've never seen. While I've been sitting here, we've had 3 major releases from some of our biggest applications, and that's just a normal everyday day for me. But when we do that, what we've done is by owning the lower environments, meaning that they can't be changed, they can't be altered, they're inherited up. Those at least base level controls I used to refer to it as base security. It's just base level security. In other words, there's no way the cloud, it's always a cloudless sky. It's always blue, and the development teams can't do a darn thing about it. They inherit that environment. And then what you do is then you can begin focusing in on the subset of controls that are beyond that, that either have some flexibility in them or they're inherently can't be automated. I mean, I haven't really figured out a way to do like, least privileged on automation. It just doesn't work. You have to have somebody actually looking at it.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that we can do around those lines. And even these controls that are inherited that have some flexibility, there's still guidelines to which they can operate in. And we begin to start checking the boxes on those. So because the idea behind a risk and threat-based program is you kind of remove all the knowns. You want to automate those out of your existence. Now you don't forget about them. One of the things I'm always telling my team, I always talk about perceived security. Perceived security is like when we perceive something to be one way, but it's really not. Happens all the time. Oh, I thought we secured that. No, you didn't. And here's why. It happens all the time, actually. So one of the things you have to do is build in those feedback loops. It could be pen testing in blue teams. It could be a vulnerability, external vulnerability assessment programs like Bug Bounty. There's a number of things that you pile onto as a security program that kind of help you verify that these things are actually being done, because that's always the biggest risk. Like I have to assume, I'd like to assume that my USCIS, one of our bigger forward-facing applications, is nice and secure and happy. Well, when we ran through the bug bounty program, yeah, not so much. So suddenly we found all these really basic vulnerabilities that were either missed or skipped, or for whatever reason were left exposed. We should have, it was just real basic security stuff that we were missing. That perceived security of what we thought was there and what really was there was very, very, very different. So I'm the biggest fan of bug bounty programs. I'm the biggest fan of pen testing, and very aggressive pen testing, actually. And of course now resilience testing, throw that in there too, I guess. But having those teams built both internal to you as well as external ones that you have no control over. I always worry that the pen test teams ultimately report to me. Are they really going to tell me all the really bad news? Now, if they're smart, they will, because I'd fire them if they didn't. But, I might fire them because they tell me really bad news. I would do that. But, it is really, really stressful. I can't even stress how often I'm constantly telling my teams about the importance of going back and removing your assumptions and re-looking fresh at what's going on, because we're always finding things. Our environment is so complex and so fast moving that it's shocking at times, actually. But it also is inherent change. That change then drives changes within your security scopes that you have to assess and get your hands wrapped around. And here automation is your friend. I can't, if your security program doesn't have as many dev teams in it as any other dev shop does, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah, and to add on to that, specifically the NIST 800 37 Rev 2 refers to the common controls. So,
yep. Yeah, I didn't invent this stuff.
No, right, exactly. So like I said, I'm a NIST nerd. Yeah, exactly. And there is, I believe, there's a RAND study as well that has some like really nerdy math. So I'll get your contact information and send it your way, doing cost calculations. And personally, I like to think of the controls like acquisition as requirements when you're developing as assessment test cases. And once it's deployed as then those are like audit controls, and then doing the continuous monitoring, like that continuous cycle as well. So it's an easier way to kind of frame it and look at it that way, in my perspective.
Yeah, and I think to answer that question, we have a kind of a prescriptive guide, like you just said, around those controls. And so when you're really looking at the different pillars that you're talking about, it's about giving that visibility, which some of the folks have already said here. Where can you get the visibility in those pillars? Then where can you get the intelligence? And then as Shane said, the automation. Where can you automate quickly? Because that's where you're going to get the success quickly, right? And then go from that up. So we have a guide on how we do that when we go to organizations.
All right, my clock tells me I have 1 minute left, but I want to know if anyone has one last burning question that's on the shorter side. All right, I don't see any, so I'll ask the panelists. We talk a lot about zero trust. We love the buzzword. Shane hates the pillars. But what's the one thing you want the audience, and this is always a good mix of federal executives and industry, to take away from this the discussion about cyber hygiene, zero trust, beyond it's important in the user and there's an EO and like rise above the platitude, Shane, rise above the platitude. I'm asking you, but since we started with Shane, I'm going to ask actually Ben, the latest, you get the start us off last word, 30 seconds or so or less. Put them on the spot.
Yeah, from a, Venafi perspective, so I heard in some of the other panels, one, we like to go out within our environment. We have this kind of Venafi community, and we have a thing we call heart values, right? So be honest when we're dealing with our customers, as well as be aware, risk-taking, and as team before self. And it's really having a partnership with our customers, making our products better. The same thing when we talk about from a bug perspective, we do that internally. We call it a hackathon, where it's like, how do we make this better for not just us, but again, to protect our nation?
I think from my personal learning today, it just really hit home that it's a spectrum that we're kind of, like Shane was saying, they've been doing this for a long time and still have the low hanging fruit. So to understand that we're in this chasm of maturity and immaturity all at once, and that zero trust, that it's just cyber hygiene rebranded, but playing catch up, yet it's the newest thing. So kind of, it's an odd space to be in. And I don't think we're going to be here for long, because I think the next 1, 3, 5 years, it's going to accelerate even quicker.
And embrace the oddity.
Yes.
Embrace the oddity. Miguel.
So, yeah, value proposition, what are you going to deliver to the customer, to the user? You know, if they don't buy into it, that's going to be an issue. Education and prioritize, don't boil the ocean. This is a journey. Really, I didn't buy into that word to begin with. It really is. You can't do it all at one time.
Shane, last word.
Really?
One word. Plastics. Plastics.
Right. So if I were gonna advise any other federal agency, I would say first invest in the basics. You know, get identity right, get your roles access right, get API access right, and then invest heavily in your automation. Make sure your security teams have access to dev teams, your risk teams, your governance teams, your SOC, everybody. And two, go to the cloud. The cloud is the most critical piece of this. If people don't realize that yet, they darn well better. In theory, you can do it on-prem, but yeah, good luck with that. And my final word of advice is it really is a journey. I've always seen it as that. We've been at this for, USCIS has been at this since 2017, 2018. And we're still working our way to that. We're probably further along than a lot of federal agencies, not because we're so much smarter, because we got forced into it. Cloud technologies forced us down that road. And we made a lot of mistakes along the way, and learning from those mistakes is really critical. So reach out to your federal partners. And for industry, you know, offer federal government basics, please. Don't try to sell them the whole package. It doesn't work. And nor as a federal organization should you invest in a single package. This should be a series of collaborative tools that all sort of span a spectrum of things. The last thing we want to do is have a single type of solution being owned, and then that takes with it half of the federal government. That's just not a smart security move to get into.
All right. You guys are a great audience. The panelists did a great job. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all very much. I will give Tom Suter his microphone back.
Thank you, Jason. That was fantastic. And I always give Shane, I have to say, I don't know if the cyber hygiene lab is going to get 60 some people in it. I kind of like the zero trust. It's good for the marketing, but I do understand your point. And speaking of zero trust, you all can leave. Hey, if you really want to stay up here, you can, but our next, so, a little inside baseball on ATARC. Everybody, and I see this as running ATARC, everybody thinks their department is the most important. So the events people who've done a great job for us today, I have to admit, you have a really good job putting this together. They think they're the most important. Sales thinks they're the most important. The working groups think they're the most important. They think they're indispensable. I kind of like look at zero trust with the pillars. I know we don't use pillars all the time, but they're all very equally important. So our next speaker, and identity management gets a lot of attention, right? I see Mike here. I'm thinking about that. But our next speaker is going to talk about one of the pillars that probably doesn't get as much attention. Really around the data part of it. And, protecting your assets from the data perspective, which I think is pretty important. And we don't address that enough at ATARC now that I'm looking at it. But Trevor Ben, federal sales engineer, senior federal sales engineer. Welcome. Thank you. And you can use the mic if you want.
What's the button for the PowerPoint, this thing?
Yeah, that's these power button. Yeah, I think it's pretty simple, but usually it takes a little second to get the hang of it. Thank you.
There we go. All right, so my name is Trevor Bren. I'm going to talk to you guys about the data pillar and its place in a zero trust strategy, and more specifically, how we can make smart investments today to be more successful with the evolving mandates and as more and more daughter mandates come out in the near future. So a little bit about me and Varonis before I get into that. We've been working with federal agencies for the past 10 years, helping them with their data hygiene, with their data governance, and with their labeling and insider threat programs. I personally have been doing it for the past 8 years with a number of the agencies up on the board, including Homeland Security and some of the Department of Defense branches, consulting mainly on zero trust. So when we talk about zero trust, the pillars, of course, data is the most important pillar, but this is normally what we end up seeing, some sort of guidance with pillars borne out, users, devices, networks, and applications. We tend to view data as the core component of this platform. I haven't met an adversary that compromises a device because they want a new laptop. Generally, they're trying to get at agency assets. And if we look at the new Department of Defense Zero Trust Reference Architecture, they're calling that out as well. It's a core pillar. It's the central pillar that all this relies around. We hear the term bandied around. We have to be data-driven agencies now. We have to make decisions in the moment. The other way we tend to see and talk about zero trust is as a list of do's and don'ts or checkboxes. We don't do login and password access anymore. We do multi-factor. We don't do device permissions anymore. We do data tagging. But we have the cheat sheet to where this is all going in the next 10 years because it was all released by NIST a long time ago. No matter how we do it, no matter what pillar we take first, at a certain point, our architecture has to look something like this. We have to have a user and a device hit a policy enforcement point that's going to take a bunch of different data streams together and make a judgment in that moment as to whether or not that person and that device should be allowed to access our resources. So we need to have our SOAR, we need to have our SIM, we need to have all our CDM systems, our data tagging all feeding in and making this judgment. So data tagging was one of the first items outlined in the executive order. There were a lot of dates and times around identifying sensitive data and labeling it. It's one of the first things that we need to be doing. But in the end of the day, we have to trust those labels enough so that when I put it in front of a machine and say, can somebody access this? I know it's good data and I can say, yes, this person should have access or no, they shouldn't. So what that means is we have to have automated systems. The days of manually flagging and tagging files are not going to fly anymore because we won't have 100% compliance where we can trust those users or that data. We won't have our old or legacy data, which we probably have 15 years of archive stored that we won't have labeled appropriately. We need to create our own custom rules and policies as well. We're not lucky like commercial agencies where we can flip on a PII rule and call it a day, right? We have mandates, we have executive orders, we have FISMA, we have our own agency programs and policies that we have to find. And underneath all of that, we're always worried about spills. We have to make sure that if anything comes from the low side to the high side, it's labeled and remediated immediately. We also need an automated system that's going to go through and find this and scan it as it happens. If I have a system that comes through and scans my whole environment, we have petabytes upon petabytes of data. A giant crawl is going to take 6 months. If I need to trust a machine, it's going to look at a file and say that label's accurate, but it's been changed 1,000 times since I last scanned it. We're never going to be successful. So we need something that's intelligent and we need something we can inspect and validate to make sure that when the results come out, we know they're good, we can tune them and we can make changes as required. So high level, we need to apply accurate labels. We need to fix when our users make mistakes, and we need to find our legacy data that's not labeled, and we need to apply labels to it. And it's all great to have labels, but we have to take action on it. There's been a lot of talk today about integration and interoperability. We need solutions that are integration first in their mindset. So we can apply our labels. I'm just going to skip through for the sake of the buttons. We can apply our labels and we can find where users have made mistakes and misconfigurations and label them all appropriately and make sure that there's cybersecurity controls around them. But I need to apply policy to it. I need to password protect it where it's appropriate. I need to make sure the DRM follows it if it ever leaves our four walls. I need to make sure that my EDR knows about it. I need to make sure that my DLP can key in on it. I need to make sure that my SIM has that information when it moves throughout our network. So just to go back to that original architecture from before, this is from the latest DoD reference architecture that came out in September of this year. Things have moved around a little bit, but basically it's all the same. I still have users and devices hitting a policy enforcement point. Some machine is making a decision and saying, with the user behavioral analytics I have and the data tags that I'm looking at and I know are accurate, I can give or revoke access to this. But if I look at an event like this, which it's a little hard to see, but this is a pretty standard cybersecurity event that we'd be looking at. Here's a user, he's touching a file, it's on a resource, and there's our network. I, as a human being, couldn't tell you whether or not that activity is trusted or untrusted, let alone a machine that's just going through the motions by itself. What we need to do is take all these systems, of course it's broken. All right, so we have to take all these systems and bring them all together so that when I have a user accessing a file, I know what kind of user they are. When I have an access event in my SIM, I know it's tagged or not tagged, and I know what policies need to be applied based on the tag. When I have an IP address, it resolves to a username, and when I have a VPN access event, I know where it ties to in the world. Only when all of those come together can I trust a machine to look at this guy touching this file at this moment and say, good or not good. And if we add all that into the picture, saying, here's a guy named David, he's logging in from Canada across the VPN. We have plenty of users who log in on VPNs from other countries all the time, but this data is labeled with a only in the continental United States access, right? He's coming in and touching a resource that we recognize, but the file is something he's never used before. And he's on a laptop we recognize, but it's one he's never used before. All of a sudden, that simple event that looked mundane becomes untrusted and high-risk activity because we have our systems interoperating together and we're tying our labels and our tags to the other components within the environment. Come on. Okay, lastly, I know there's a lot of trust about there's a lot of talk about the zero trust journey. And I just want to reiterate that there's no silver bullet. No one is going to make one investment and solve all their zero trust problems. It's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can be smart now. We cannot take the easy way and just say, this is too hard, or I can do it easily now and we'll fix it in 5 years, because we're just going to be looking at the spaghetti string mess that we made and restarting again. And we're just going to have 4 less years to do it. So what we have to do is take the appropriate steps to be successful, do all the labeling in a way that we're going to trust a machine to make that judgment for us, and then bring in the user behavioral analytics and analytic components so that we can really actually enforce zero trust in the future. We do this with multiple federal agencies, like I said before, and we offer free risk assessments for agencies looking to see what their posture is right now and how they can get from where they are to a zero trust compliant posture and the data pillar. And I'm out of time.
Hang on one second. I got a question for you.
Sure.
So where do you think we are with the federal government? Where are we on this journey?
On this
across the
journey?
agencies, yeah.
So-
So the data pillar.
From the data pillar particularly, and we've heard a lot of this, identity is easy, network is easy. Most agencies have looked at the data pillar in the same way that CDM was structured in phases, and they've said data is a later phase because it's hard for me to do right now. But the problem with taking the hardest thing to do, or the thing that requires an FTE, and putting it to the end, is 2024 is when the deadlines start happening, right? If I take the hardest thing and I put it at the beginning of 2024, I've got 12 months to get it done. And realistically, I have 8 months to get it done. So you're going to end up in a little bit of trouble in those situations, I think.
And I think we learned we do a lot of data and AI. That's the crown jewels.
Yep.
So great. Well, thank you for that, Trevor. Appreciate it. On a serious note, I hate to do this. But we had a friend of ours that recently passed. His name is Jim Russo. He was at GSA. Many of you know, he was on many of our panels. And I had known him like 20 years. And, he passed last week, age 65, leaving his wife, and he had been probably on ATARC events since pandemic. He had the lead for a long time. He was very active, and we're going to really miss Jim. We're going to take a last break. We got our last panel coming in, and I told you this was a breakfast summit. We're actually serving lunch too. We have you can eat it now, you can take it to go, you can eat it now and take it to go if you want. You can, but we have some box lunch out there for you. But we'll do a touch and go break, and then we'll get our last panel on. Thank you. There he is. Okay. Last panel of the day, and we saved the best to last. Hopefully I won't offend anybody else who was earlier. Although my panel was pretty good. No, I'm just kidding. Next, I'm going to introduce, one second. Oh, Derek Johnson with SC Media. He's going to be moderating this panel, and Derek's huddling up with his panel right now. I think you ready? All right, let's bring everybody up. And the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. We good? Yeah, if we could get Paul and then they've got the names up there. Okay. I think we figured it out. Yes, Kathy. Yep, Russell. Okay. Stacy. Oh.
Stacy's not here.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our final session, prioritizing improvements to your software supply chain security, where we're going to be talking about how agencies and companies have really been responding over the past year and a half to a series of mandates and initiatives that were put in place following the SolarWinds supply chain attack, which compromised, as far as we know, 9 federal agencies and 100 private sector companies, perhaps more. My name is Derek Johnson. I'm an editor and reporter at SC Media, where we cover cybersecurity issues across the public and private sector, including government. If you haven't had a chance to check us out before, please do, scmagazine.com. And I will do a little setup on the topic here before we get started. But before I do, I want to bring up our esteemed panelists first, because we have a crowded stage today. I want to make sure we all get introduced and settled. So joining us today, we have Paul Blahush, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at the Cybersecurity Directorate within the Office of the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Labor. We have Kathy Amores, who I think Kathy wins the award for the longest title. She's the Cybersecurity Program Management Manager at the Office of the Chief Information Officer at the National Marine Fisheries Services and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration within the Department of Commerce. We have Russell Ramos, who's the Acting Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We have Nita Jones-Coleman, who's a Program Analyst for Supply Chain Risk Management at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And our lone private sector representative, no pressure, Brian Reed, who's the Chief Mobility Officer at Now Secure. So welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to a good discussion here today. And I'll just take a minute to set us up here. As I said, it's been about a year and a half since the Biden administration issued its executive order, and about 10 months since the Office of Management and Budget put out its larger strategy for moving federal agencies to a zero trust security architecture. And this has really been, in my view, probably the 2 most active years in federal cybersecurity policy ever. And I think that's largely been driven by 2 things, right? One is the SolarWinds compromise, which I mentioned before. You also have issues like ransomware and the Colonial Pipeline attack, which really catapulted digital security issues from this kind of niche thing, this niche policy issue, into something that regularly gets the attention of the President of the United States on a regular basis. It's put this sort of massive spotlight on the federal government's lack of modern protections, as well as our collective reliance on software and third parties to do our everyday work. So, the SolarWinds, I want to know what each one of you are doing within your own agencies or your own company to operationalize some of these things. But I'll start off with sort of a broad question. Certainly SolarWinds was, as Kevin Mandia from CEO of Mandiant said, a sniper shot, right? It was this very sophisticated campaign that was carried out by an elite Russian hacking unit. But the reality of the state of software visibility and insecurity today is such that you really don't need to be the SVR or the GRU to exploit a lot of these vulnerabilities because there's bad code embedded across systems and assets across the commercial and the public sector. So my question is, we're kind of 2 years into this journey. We still have more to go before we get to some of these 2024 timelines. But I want to know, are we today in a better place than we were 2 years ago when it comes to identifying or mitigating or stopping some of these attacks? Is the federal government better positioned now than it was in December 2020 when the SolarWinds compromise was disclosed, and why?
Okay, I'll start off. No. Next question. I would say the improvements right now are a work in progress. You weren't going to fix the problems that showed themselves with SolarWinds, which was, flaws in that company's vulnerabilities in their development process, right? There were ways that a bad actor could inject themselves into that process. Well, as far as I know, the executive order or anything didn't fix that yet. What we're gonna try to do to get that fixed is to work with vendors, work with a whole bunch of people, frankly. It's gonna be a team effort to try to make sure that there is good hygiene throughout the sort of software development process. Starts with the vendors, starts with the federal government and agencies and acquisition offices and the FAR Council and all this stuff, making sure that there's awareness and standards in place for how software needs to be developed securely by our vendor partners. But then you also look at the other, I think another part of this, which you didn't mention, is Log4j. Now, Log4j is a different thing. That's where there's vulnerabilities in a widely used component of software, right? That's like when I've always equated that to non-IT people, but that's like there's an ingredient in food somewhere that's now been determined to be a carcinogen or something. It's like, okay, it's in a lot of stuff and we need to get rid of it, right? So the Log4j comes down to that we need to know what's embedded in all of our software, and that's that thing like the software bill of materials, which is another horn on this beast, right? But there's a lot of horns on the beast, and they all need to be addressed. And so I'd say we're in a better position only because we have awareness, and we're working to mitigate these problems. Now I'll turn it over to my Steve.
Well, my turn. Good morning, everyone. In terms of the SolarWinds, it did hit us from all fronts. Again, at the NOAA side, we strive to improve our processes in starting with acquisitions and looking very closely at the vendors, at the products that we are procuring. We are also looking at our software supply development practices and the use of APIs, things that are coming, our developers are using that are coming, outsource our open source code and things like that. And working towards also awareness from our developers, looking at implementing, we're implementing actually the DevOps pipeline into our environment. We at the headquarters level, we're also looking at training our developer workforce to give them an awareness of not just using all of these tools that they have that they look nice or that provide all those services, but those APIs need to be validated and verified with tools that are now available in the market that we can make very use of. Also, the Log4j has striven to create some of the regulations that came in from NIST, like the vendors can look at the 800.161. We work with our partners in making sure that the software that they're producing, their infrastructure as well, is secure. And looking at their 800.171 security documentation to make sure that they have good practices in following and doing continuous monitoring of what their activities are. And that has helped us a lot in getting where we need to be in terms of securing our interconnectivities with other partners that we have in the using and for our collaborations at the fisheries management to protect our fisheries management data. And I'll give it to you next.
So thank you very much. So echo that completely. So Haj Ramos from Housing Urban Development. So really with any cybersecurity event that we've experienced current and past, it's always a wake-up call, right? So supply chain risk management isn't necessarily, hey, what are we doing new? It's what we should have been doing in the past. And I think for HUD, what we did was we really looked into basically building a program, a supply chain risk management program, which not just only involved the IT security folks, but it involved all pieces of the puzzle. My counterparts here were talking about working with their acquisition folks. We strive to actually make sure that eventually building with the supply chain risk management moving forward, the procurement folks, because they are the tip of the spear in regards to procurement for anything IT or services coming into the agency, that they're involved, that they know what the requirements are. Let's not get, into a Log4j or SolarWinds issue. Let's build supply chain risk management checks from the beginning. And then also to the chief risk officer, who is fairly brand new with the agency, we've got her on board in regards to this is the issues with supply chain risk management. This is what we need to do forward. And we get everybody doing their head nods north to south, and you get the buy-in. As to my organization, IT security, what have we done? Improvement, improvement, improvement. It's really now we have to kind of fortify what have we been doing in regards to NIST 800-53. Really start from scratch. We have to kind of basically rebuild our risk management framework to include some of the covered technologies that were put out in the front. What is the new software and applications that are we moving forward? It's very easy to put the gates down now, ladies and gentlemen, and move forward with the process. The big challenge with supply chain risk management now is all the technologies that you have within your environment. I talked to some of my counterparts here in the waiting room, and we've got so much things that we're so dependent on, software applications, but we've never done a deep dive to see what the chipsets are on some of these laptops, some of the applications built in unforeseen places over the water. But we got to get back into and getting more better security assessments in regards to checking those, but also to batten down the hatches with the IT contingency plan, because if we get SolarWinds again, what are we going to do? Call to action, and then also to incident response. If some of these things are thwarted or something middleware or chipsets, what is your SOC team going to do? What's your incident response team going to do? So process. I could speak for days about it, but it's all about improvement. And my teammates here are probably doing the same thing, working with procurement and bettering our processes.
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone here else on the panel has said. I think, are we in a better place? Yes, because we have an awareness of what we're looking for. We are aligning our people, our resources. We're also aligning our technology differently than we did prior to SolarWinds. And I think because of that, we are aligning ourselves so that we can do better in the contracting area, right? Making sure our contract folks know what they're looking for when they sign those contracts. And so we're going back to acquisition. We do a lot of things off the shelf. So a lot of our stuff is contract oriented. So I think we're taking a closer look at that. We're making sure that not only are we building teams that look across the organization to try to realign our resources, because of course all of these things came with no money. So we have to look internally to see how we can align our resources, our people, our technology to do a better job in really taking a look at our vendors, making sure our vendors are not only providing those services for us, but we got to have a vendor verification that aligns across the government and not just internally built within our own government agencies. And I think that's something that we're reaching out across our area to collaborate more with organizations, other government organizations and other businesses so that we can do that more efficiently. And a lot of the things that the rest of the panel has said, we're also doing those things as well.
All right, so I get to be the industry community here. So I go back to BlackBerry. I remember sitting in a panel many, many years ago, talking about mobile security. That's clearly evolved a lot. I think some interesting things that are happening is that the White House cybersecurity orders have become the tail wagging the dog into industry. So everybody in this room use a mobile phone, right? Every one of you uses mobile apps. Your employees use mobile apps, right? Have you ever seen anywhere in the software ecosystem data safety labels for any software product you ever bought? Ever? Anywhere? Isn't that in some of the OMB and NIST requirements coming soon, right? Guess what? It already exists on Apple and Google app stores. So Apple has a privacy label. They call it a nutrition label. You can go search on iOS nutrition labels. You actually see what the app developers say they're doing with your data, what it's collecting, where it's going. Now, I'm going to separate security and privacy, but say that that is an advancement down the path in terms of making sure the right things are done with data from an industry perspective. Google, who sponsored an ATARC event a few weeks ago, Google has something called data play safety. And in that program, developers have to attest to what they're doing with your data, but they've now added an independent security verification. So if you're using Android devices, your organization is using Android applications, you can go look for not only their data label, but go look and see if there's been an independent security verification. There are 5 labs in the world that can do that, much like you get NIAP certification from an independent third party. The NIAP requirements are similar. It actually works from the OWASP standards in terms of how it works. So industry was accelerated by the EO. Now, if you talk at security leaders at iOS, and Apple iOS or Google, they won't say they did this because of the executive order, but both programs were accelerated by the need to drive better transparency and use of data. So I do think the industry is trying to align in terms of trying to support what federal agencies are doing. And we're also seeing behavior now where financial institutions and healthcare institutions are looking at the same regulations and using them as considerations for their own security strategies for their own software supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that I've heard, before is that not only does this drive a lot of action within government, but that it also kind of provides a little cover out there in the private sector. If you're looking to do things, you can point to and say, hey, look, this is where the standards are going. This is where the status quo is going. We need to make sure that we're keeping pace. I know that one of the things to me that the Cybersecurity Executive Order and a lot of the mandates that flowed out of it really kind of underscored is just how hard implementing some of these even basic protections are within the federal space, right? Things like multi-factor authentication on devices, things like encryption. When it comes to software security, I'm curious, and a lot of these mandates that have come out, what has been the biggest challenge that you've had to deal with? What's been the biggest, whether it's having to change a certain process within your agency, whether it's having to inventory your devices, whether it's whether inventory your software. Give me a sense for what the biggest lift has been and where you've kind of experienced the most friction as you're trying to meet these goals, not just now, but over the next couple of years.
So I can jump on that one. I had mentioned something earlier in regards to, really putting the gates down, moving forward, we can do it. But the really big challenge is the technologies that we have already within our infrastructures. Some are actually critical to the organization. So of course, not only do you have to have a battle with the program office to remove the application, but also trying to find something that's relevant or that's pertinent that you can probably kind of lift and shift or replace. I think one of the big challenges, sir, is really getting 2 things. One is the adequate testing of new software applications in the market. I mean, you had mentioned some of the data labeling, which is great to know, but understanding what some of these new technologies, and I know everything's up in the cloud, also to some of the stuff that's client-based, is actually taking the time as an organization to do the test. I mean, you hear all the time in your CCMB, we got to test. We do have to do software testing. So before it actually reaches, your planet to actually put on your network, it's actually doing the testing. And you'd be surprised on some of the things where they actually have to call home. And sometimes if it's over the pond, gosh knows what kind of software they're going to be doing, although it's, reasonable. And then the second challenge is really getting some of the qualified staff to come in and do that testing. I mean, we can do policy, but getting the relevant folks in the chairs, maybe the 1 or 2 persons that will do the actual testing for you and providing legitimate results versus just doing a scan and saying, here you go, CISO, this is what we got. You want detailed information as an IT security practitioner, a CIO or an executive to say that the new software that you want to bring in that's going to, support your highest executive is not going to be a supply chain risk. So testing, and then people to do the testing, and then adequate test results are some of the big challenges I would see.
And Russell, I know that we kind of were chatting in the green room here before, and I know you were talking about how it's one thing to set up a process, to audit or evaluate the software, a new piece of software that you're buying or a new contract. It's another thing to have to go back to your existing environment, right? And set up a process for all of that stuff. So does that, can you talk a little bit about how the differences between when you're looking forward versus trying to look backward and trying to make sure that you are complying and following what you're supposed to follow for all of that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. And also to add to that, the software's already been bought, right? So the reality is someone's already bought it, that's already in-house, and guess what? It's already installed in production. So the challenge is really getting the buy-in. We talk collectively about getting our leadership's buy-in. It's really getting in front of them folks to really say, in the old world of IT security, it was always no, and then you walk away. But this is the age where, security practitioners, CISOs, DEP CISOs, and all the likes have to say no, and this is why. However, here's a reasonable solution that we can do it. And so really just communications, folks, is really not necessarily just write on a piece of paper, no, tell them why. And, kind of spawn the conversations. This is the day and age. I know it's COVID. We like teams, but be able to collaborate with your engineers, your folks that are introducing the software, and then, of course, the people that are procuring it because they just want to push things out. Just try to make word and try to communicate. It's tougher, easier said than done, but I think it does a world of good when people are nodding their heads now north to south that this is good. You just get some conversations rolling.
Anyone else want to weigh in on pain points?
I'll jump in a little bit. I think one of our pain points, and probably a lot of people have this, is the small business. We work a lot with the small businesses, and then trying to get them on board and make sure that they can be in compliance is a huge issue for us. And so, it's not it's not okay to just say, hey, we can't do business with you because we have a mandate to do business with small businesses. And so we have to find a way, and we've been challenged to find processes and procedures to work with our small businesses to help them get through this process and to make sure that their products are verified, because we have privacy issues, we have medical issues, we have software issues, and we have to look at that all across our business avenues and make sure that each one of our small businesses that provide those services or products can meet those requirements, because some of those things that we utilize are very unique in their aspect, and there's not a lot of other people who can supply those things. So we can't just go to a Booz Allen to supply a product. We might have to go through the small business, and we must understand what their struggle is and how we can help them, get into compliance or help them work through that process so that our products and our procedures are aligned with what we're trying to do as well. So that's a big issue for us, is that small business and vendor, and then verifying that they're meeting that, just not verbally, but also actually checking that. So who's checking that, right? So that means more resources, more people, more processes in order to do that. And so that's a struggle for us as well. And I think that we've done that through some processes. We've done that through some open conversations. And we're going to continue to do that, to work through that, because we have a lot of small businesses that actually provide products for us.
Yeah, so I'll add into this a little bit, something to think about in listening to both of you, and what a lot of you struggle with when I come in and help you develop your strategy, is that modern automation can actually move the needle a lot with fewer people and less cost, right? So a lot of the industry community is working on automating supply chain analysis. Sonatype was talking earlier from the open source library perspective. When you look at mobile, I use mobile as another example. We have commercial app stores, right? There are 6.5 million apps in the commercial app stores. Well, guess what? Every single one of them has already been scanned multiple times and are continuously scanned. And it'll cost you peanuts to get that data from a vendor like us versus doing the work yourself and hiring all the people. Now, I'm sorry, all the websites in the world don't have that, and commercial apps have that necessarily, but the community around mobile has actually been trying to solve this problem for a very long time. There used to be an infrastructure people used called AppVet in the federal government as a for example of that with the sharing. But one of the interesting things that's now happening in all of this is give you order of magnitude, like for your small developer. Let's say that you have a small business building mobile app for you. Google ADA certification is about $3,000 a year. That's it, one time, you're done. So the economics for an application developer is actually very low in order for them to get that kind of testing in it. And from a mass scale analysis of the hundreds or thousands of apps in an organization, it's quite economical as well. When we look at some of the work we've done inside of DOJ and the U.S. Marshal Service, they've tried to solve the problem of how do you say no to something somebody already chose, right? And work their way through finding an alternative. Hey, maybe this app, this transportation app you want to use doesn't work. I realize you just purchased it. Maybe there's a set of controls you can turn on to make it acceptable. Or you convert and say, hey, here's an alternative one. I've surveyed the market. This one meets our security requirements. Maybe we can figure out a way to shift procurement in that. So the problem of it already getting in is always a challenge. The problem of doing it at scale is a challenge, but look for modern automation to try to help you through that problem.
Yeah.
And I would just to add just one example that we had to deal with at NOAA is the unmanned aerial vehicles, where we had a lot of products that came from a foreign country that we're not friends with. And we had to work around through those to complete our mission, to accomplish our mission. We had to ear gap those models, and we were able to safely use and get our data for continuing of our mission.
Yeah. Nita, I want to go back to something that you said, because you were talking about basically trying to manage your these mandates with a lot of your small and medium-sized businesses that you deal with. It sounds a little bit sort of similar to what DoD is trying to deal with their cybersecurity maturity model certification program, where on the one hand they want to raise the floor of security across the department, across the DIB. And that requires, at a certain point saying, no, this does not meet our standards. This is not good enough to do business. On the other hand, DoD and other agencies, you don't want to crowd out a lot of these small and medium sized businesses that are often responsible for innovation. They're often responsible for providing services that cannot be easily replaced. So I would love to hear some folks on the panel just talk about how, as you are looking to put some of these standards in place around software supply chain security, how do you manage, this question of setting a standard while not, kind of kneecapping your ability to do business with a wide variety of vendors in order to meet your mission. I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you have it.
I can go. At NOAA, we had established, we're using the DOC risk management assessments, which is a tool that allows us to see country of origin for all of these products. And it's a very strong and mature program. The thing that we're struggling with that is that we have to, now with the coming up of the critical definitions of critical software definitions, we have to streamline that a little bit, because in some cases we have been asking for those type of assessments to be done for all the products that are coming in, especially in the cloud area. We have a lot of risk mandates from the NOAA level. It's a requirement that all of our products, our cloud products, go through the risk assessment. And the cost for that is sometimes is cost prohibitive for some of the small organizations that we work with. That's a challenge. So providing the funding for those assessments it's a good thing to do to protect the organization, as well as looking at creating catalogs and having the kind of like a library of those assessments, and so that way those security teams can look at and get advantage of all that knowledge that is already out there.
Yeah, I think currently at the VA, we've taken a look at all of our critical assets, whether it's a medical supply or software or an actual service that our vendors are supplying, especially in the small to medium. And we went through a risk categorization of that to see, where our risks lie. And I think that was very eye-opening for us, right? To figure out what does that look like across the board? And then once we kind of determine that, now we're trying to work through the process of actually saying, okay, where is this risk lie? Is it a high risk? Is it a medium risk? And then working with those vendors to see how we can either lower that risk, mitigate that risk, or, in some cases we have to accept it because that is certain medical supplies. I think at some point we forgot that they use IT. They're part of IT, right? And I think it's not that we forgot. I think that when we started this process, we didn't look at medical the same way that we looked at our operational pieces, right? And so we're going back and we're looking at that and say, oh yeah, those use chips. We need to figure out where those chips come from. And then how they're manufactured, where we're storing them. And those are some things that we internally are taking a deeper dive and look at. But I think across the board, I think all the government agencies are doing the same thing because that is where we really put I call it the needle to the pincushion at the point where we know that, hey, this is a point where it's going to hurt us, right? If we don't do something or at least are not aware of that. And that's a lot of training. Training to our vendors, training to our internal staff so that they can see it and have an awareness of it.
Well, and if I can pull on that thread that I think Nita started with, it's risk management. This may surprise some of you, but the Department of Labor doesn't exist to be the premier supply chain risk management company or organization in the world, right? We exist to provide services to the American worker, job seeker, and retiree. So we need to get the job done. Supply chain is one area of risk. There's many areas of risk, right, in the organization. So it's our job to articulate, to identify and articulate that risk to key decision makers. And while it also isn't our mission to necessarily comply with all executive orders and this and that, but we need to look at that and say, how does that help us be more secure? Which of those things help us be more secure, but also to be able to accomplish our mission? So, you look at those small businesses where a lot of times maybe they're the best solution. So I think it's got to be working with them to create the environment that they can be successful with the supply chain risks as well. Now, what's going to help them the most, I think, is something that a lot of the panelists have talked about, maybe Brian the most, is we need standardization and commonality so that small business X doesn't have to meet requirements from NOAA that are different than requirements from HUD, that are different than requirements from VA, that are different than requirements from DOL. There needs to be common standardized requirements for the software and IT communication products that we're getting. And I think once those can get established, that will help small businesses, large businesses, and us as the consumer of those products. Give me that. I may show my age here, but give me the underwriter's laboratory seal of approval on the product. And then I can vastly lessen the amount of work I need to do to scan and trust that product, right? I can say, okay, I'm pretty good there. The FDA tells me food's safe. I don't go then at home and test it myself, right? I go, okay, I'm going to trust that that's okay. So that's kind of the thing I think we need to help small businesses, large businesses, and us as the consumers.
Yeah, speaking of standardized and offering a standardized process and it seems like a lot of these conversations around software supply chain security come at some point back to the idea of a software bill of materials, right? And that gets thrown out there a lot of times. I know I've spoken to Alan Friedman and sort of other folks, and he's always very always takes pains to say, look, this is not the silver bullet. This is not the thing that solves the problem. It is a tool that we can use to solve the problem. And so there were a number of initiatives that were kicked off related to SBOMs out of the Cybersecurity Executive Order. one of the issues is that, you know, my SBOM might be different than your SBOM. And getting that kind of standardized SBOM approach is a lot trickier in practice than it sounds like when you're just talking about the issue more broadly. And one of the things that I'm curious about is, you know, we've been laying the groundwork here over the past few years to eventually get to a place where we can start using and operationalizing SBOMs. I'm curious, is anyone here actually using SBOM in an operational way at this point, or planning to over, say, the next year, even in limited use cases, or are we still not there yet? Are we still, is that still something that we're looking down the line?
I think we are ready to use SBOMs because the use of them is not that difficult for us. If we can reference the software bill of materials, and here's maybe the use case I'm talking about. And you can look at log4j, right? So there was a component in the software that was a problem, had a significant vulnerability, it was easily exploitable remotely, et cetera, et cetera. So if we had SBOMs, and we didn't have this for log4j, and that's what worried DHS and CISA, right? Is the time that it took to identify where everything was. But if you have the SBOM for your software, even if it's only a portion of your software, it helps you to know, okay, here's everywhere that's deployed, and I know where I need to go and mitigate, patch, take offline, whatever. Otherwise, you're taking that time to contact your vendors to ask them, do you have this in your software? Tick, 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 tick. Your adversary is not waiting for you to get an answer, right? Well, I'll wait till they get their answer before I attack them. So that's where it buys you time. So if we had SBOMs, yes, we could definitely use them today.
Yeah, if I may, how many people freaked out after OpenSSL last week? Anybody catch that? OpenSSL v3 had a server-side vuln in it. About an hour and a half later, we had a download of all the SBOMs for the 6 million apps in the App Store. It could tell you which ones were exposed to it. Now, the good news is OpenSSL v3 was server-side, not client-side, which means it wasn't impacted by mobile or client-based applications. The bad news is some of you may remember Heartbleed a few years ago. So 38% of all the apps in the App Store are still exposed to Heartbleed. How about them apples after 3 years? So it is possible to collect the data. I think your question about the standards is another challenge, right? So OWASP has a project called Cyclone DX. That looks like that's going to become a standard, much in the way the traditional OWASP ASVS and MASVS have been standards when it comes to application security. A lot of organizations are supporting Allen's involved with Cyclone DX. And so that may wind up emerging as basically an interoperability standard to make it easy for everybody to generate a standard SBOM that anything can consume. And there's some open source projects running around there. So it can provide value. I read an article last night from a CISO from Wall Street Bank that said SBOMs are useless without being able to do something with the data. So that's really the challenge they're trying to tackle, is not the data collection, but the action that follows from the data collection as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to pause here because I do want to open up the floor to the audience to see if anyone has any questions for our panelists. I have some other questions that I can dive into, but we have some time here for audience questions if there are any brave people out there.
Anybody brave? Okay. See, I'm going to learn from Jason.
That's how, yeah.
Hold it.
That's how you do it.
Now I'm worried.
Yeah, so, you know, the question about SBOMs that everyone seems to be, you know, wondering, well, yeah, how do we secure and what do we do with it? My question is simply, when you have an architecture where you got APIs, you got legacy, and then you got new apps coming in. So how do you go and create an SBOM or find that information in the legacy software when you don't really have a way to scan it?
challenging one. Like, so if someone has like mainframe, not that I know of any agencies that are part of mainframe. You do the best that you can, sir. I think that given the SBOMs currently, that's the here and now, that's the modernized applications that can adequately kind of give you that threat landscape and what to do. With mainframes and old technology, it's really a hit or miss because there's not a lot of support that you have out there. But lo and behold, you might surprise yourself with somebody that does it, or you may want to ping on the vendor that might still be supporting that and go to them. So really, I don't have a firm answer on that one. It's just do the best with what you have in-house and then try to build off of that and then figure out what can be done for that obsolete or that technology. If it was up to the CISO, disconnect and get something modernized, just, but for the most part, you really, if it's critical, you have to do with what you can, with what you have.
And some SBOMs better than none, right? I think everyone's going to find some technology that they've got that maybe is a challenge to get an SBOM for. Right? That doesn't mean, well, I'm not going to do SBOMs at all then because I can't get it for that thing. So get it where you can, use it where they're available, start putting it into new solicitations that's a requirement for the vendors. And then hopefully that legacy equipment, graduates out of your environment eventually. But it's also good to know where you don't have an SBOM, right? Because now you know what Donald Rumsfeld, right? I'm going to have my known knowns, my SBOMs. I'm going to have my known unknowns, which is where I know I don't have an SBOM and I maybe need to monitor that system closely because it could be vulnerable. And then I'm going to have my worst conditions, which are my unknown unknowns. And those are the ones that are going to get me, right? But yeah, so I think it's valuable even to know where you don't have an SBOM.
Yeah, one thought to apply to that is think of this as like a 3-tier model. So you've got new procurement, which is partner with your procurement team to put in the requirements, right? That you want to get the SBOM, what the fidelity of that needs to be. Does it need to meet a standard? Does it need to be able to load into a system you have? So that's your new procurement. Then you have the inventory of your modern systems, right? So that's going back to your vendors or using third parties to analyze stuff you already have deployed and deal with it in some way, shape, or form. And then you have the legacy. And so triangulate that with your risk model. Right, if you have a legacy system that has low risk and low attach, then you don't really need to worry about it in the same way as a legacy system that's supporting the warfighter in the field, for example, or something like that. So practical business strategy that we all sort of take for economics can apply to some of this, right, as a strategy, and just try to organize yourself and think about it in those 3 pillars of the new procurement, the existing modern systems, and the legacy systems sliced by your risk model.
Yeah, if I could just add to that one, just to kind of close out your question, sir, is that my teammates here are basically saying call to action. So because something doesn't have an SBOM, doesn't mean you don't do anything. That's the wrong thing to do. It's still sense of urgency. You have to take action. There's not a plan on an SBOM. You might have to develop one. So don't raise your hands up in the air or put your head in the sand. You got to do something about it. So
20 years later, and that Rumsfeld quote is still getting a lot of play, man. It stands the test of time. Any other questions? Anyone else want to jump in? Okay, if not, I am going to, we have a couple minutes left here, so I'm going to leave you with a final question here. Everybody has to answer. You can't sit this one out. Sorry. So we're a democracy, right? We today's election day. Go out and vote if you haven't. We don't have emperors or dictators here, but let's pretend for a minute that you have been given absolute authority to make any one change or implement any one idea within the federal government by fiat that would address this problem and build off of what the federal government has done already, right? So you can't just say throw it all in the trash. To address supply chain security, tell me what you would like to see done, say, over the next 2 years here, to build off of what we've seen in these first 2 years. What would have the biggest impact in terms of providing software assurance to the federal government?
And you want me to start?
You can.
It's a pro and con to start, right? I can pick any answer and not duplicate anyone else, but also I don't get as much time to think about what my answer would be. But I would say it would be to get that standard approach together for how our vendors should be developing secure software and how we are to evaluate them for secure software. And it's the same across the board. I think that helps, again, helps small vendors, big vendors, helps us as consumers. And I'd also argue it helps the entire IT ecosystem, because it's going to raise all boats. You know, it helps mom and pop run in their shop because the software is more secure. So I would say I would like to see that done at a standardized level by like the FAR Council, something like that. Say here's how software must be developed, maintained, et cetera, to be used in a federal network.
Great answer. Well, I think that if I had the funding available, I would focus on awareness and also getting the skills needed for performing all these functions, because it's not just one side, it's not just from the government side, it's from also the vendor side, and having all those different silos integrated and working together in one common goal to get our infrastructure more secure is very, very important for the organization. So having those communications, like one of my partners said, is one plus that we should pursue with the government.
So I'll piggyback off of what Paul said and just take it one. Being a federal employee and a federal executive, if I had that one wish, two things. One, stronger collaboration amongst federal organizations. I mean, we actually touched upon, sharing things with other organizations, but I think, maybe a stronger roundtable where federal agencies basically share their things. And why reinvent the wheel when we can share items of interest and kind of parlay off of that and then make our program stronger if we're building a supply chain risk management program. And the second one is, if I had something, and of course, everyone always asks in my organization, we need like a list of approved software. If we could actually put something in you could be authoritative and then, just say that, hey, here you go. These are kind of like the high level, Microsoft Office 365, not that I'm saying, I'm just putting it as an example. Somewhere we as federal aid organizations, even the legislative and even commercial, can go to supply chain risk management. And this is what's already been done and reviewed in your best interest. These are kind of things, kind of like FedRAMP list. So two things from me.
So it's unfair because I'm at the end of the table. I totally agree with what Paul said, because that was one of my first things on my list. And then Russ came and stole my second, which is the collaboration piece. I think we benefited greatly from a proof of concept that we did with MITRE, which included NASA, Department of Energy, as well as the IRS, and just having those conversations with those other organizations and knowing that we're not in a fight by ourselves and that they're experiencing some of the same things that we're experiencing, and talking through those processes and actually, talking about maybe tools that work best for each of those agencies that might help us with some of the issues that we were having would be one of the, I think, a golden point for me. And then also the other part is just having a list to refer to. I think we spend so much time trying to find what tool works, what software is approved. If there was some place to go to where we can just, look at that or have that reservoir, it would greatly help me, because that would mean I wouldn't have to spend so much time on it. And then I think it would just be helpful across the government agencies. So that would be mine.
So I love being last.
Okay, good.
So it's all good. Do you trust the food you eat? Probably. Why? One of the reasons is safety labels. Pass a law. Get Congress to pass a friggin' law for software labeling. That will solve the problem. Security through transparency, right? So as soon as every vendor has to publish what's in their software and some level of information around security and privacy, the whole thing will change. All of you will get that centralized repository that you need that has the data you want to make the decisions. The other thing it'll do is it'll take giant companies and embarrass them if they have to publish bad data. So what are they going to do? The economics are going to drive their behavior to go fix the issues that are relevant to them, right? So I do think security, transparency through security, or security through transparency, and bringing software labeling as through legislation is going to happen somewhere in the world. There are some mandates already in Singapore, and I believe Denmark or Sweden's working on a law right now, and I expect that we should get that in the US to whatever degree Congress can agree to do anything. So that's my thought. Software labeling.
That's a great,
But Brian for dictator.
yeah.
I don't want to run it.
From Brian's mouth to Congress's ear.
I don't want to.
All right, well, that is all the time that we have today. I thought it was a great panel. Thank you so much, Paul, Kathy, Russell, Nita, Brian. Thank you to ATARC for having us. And I do hope that this was a useful and informative panel for you all. Thank you so much for sticking around. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Derek. I might have to steal that king for a day move. That was a good one. It might be mine before too long. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate all of our partners. Great job, all the speakers today. We actually have a few more lunches left. Get them while you can. And you don't eat 2 lunches before everybody else had a chance. Thank you all.
Whatever's in it is more than we They don't have to be perfect. And there'll be a huge pushback.
Great job. Thank you.